Han Sun looked at the woman, his expression carefully veiled. He wanted to know, but the woman obviously wanted something in return. He would need to know what she wanted before he agreed to some sort of bargain. The woman smiled at him. I will tell you, but you will have to help me with something first. Do it, and I will explain everything. You are so strong. If there's something that you can't do yourself, how will I be able to accomplish it? Han Sun asked hesitantly. The woman smiled and said, Don't worry, the task isn't dangerous. I simply can't leave this island, so I need your help to get it done. Han Sun remained silent, but he didn't think this would be a trivial task. The woman paused, then pointed in a particular direction. Once you leave this island, keep going that way. Before long, you will see some light. You must follow that light. Then, you will find an island that is identical to this one. That island doesn't have a wooden house on it though. You must go and cut off the top of that mountain just like this. That is all you have to do. Is there a creature over there or something? Han Sun asked. The woman shook her head. No, but you must remember one thing. Once you see the light, you cannot speak. As long as you don't talk, you should be fine. If you say anything, even if it is just a single word, you will be dead. What is the light? Han Sun asked. I don't know what it is, but it is still up to you if you want to go or not. I won't force you to go if you don't want to, the woman said. Then, she turned away from Han Sun and carried on with her research. Can I see those Geno arts? Han Sun pointed to the books lined up on the shelves. They were the best Geno arts of all the races. Even if Han Sun didn't practice them, it would be useful for him to be able to remember them all. If you are willing to go, you can read as much as you like. Okay, you can leave my house now, the woman said, without raising her head. Han Sun flew out the window, and he landed outside the yard. The woman was way too clean, and she had a serious case of OCD. If Han Sun wasn't working for her, she would never agree to let him touch her things. Han Sun decided to go to the place the woman had described to him. The woman had nothing to gain by hiding any dangers in the task. If Han Sun died halfway through the task, then sending him would have been pointless. Even if it is dangerous, I can only suppose the danger will arise after completing the mission. Han Sun knew that the woman probably wanted him to free her from her prison. Han Sun turned and looked back through the window. I'm willing to go, but first, can you tell me what kind of test the sacred leader conducted? Han Sun asked. I will tell you when you get back. The woman's voice responded from someplace inside the wooden house. I'm afraid that when I get back, you will not be here, Han Sun said. The woman went silent for a while, and Han Sun wasn't sure what that meant. When he was just about to say something more, something flew out the window. Han Sun caught the item, and he noticed it was a stone book. He tried to open it, but it seemed to have been sealed by some sort of power. Everything you need to know is within that book. When you have finished what I've asked you to do, the locks on that book will be removed. Now, it is again up to you to decide if you want to go or not, the woman said. Han Sun looked at the stone book. He wasn't sure if what the woman was saying was true, but he was out of options. He had no choice but to believe her. Otherwise, he'd never know the truth. Damn. Still holding the stone book, Han Sun gnashed his teeth and asked. In the legends, Sacred had a xenogenic space called the Sanctuaries. Do you know that place? That is the place Sacred Leader researched the immortal spirits. I've never been there myself though, so I don't know, the woman said. The fact that the woman didn't know about the sanctuaries was quite disappointing to Han. Senator Han Sun wanted to know the answers to a few more questions, but the woman said, I will not answer any more questions of yours if you aren't going. You have to tell me what the light looks like, Han Sun said. You will know it when you see it, the woman said coldly. Han Sun shrugged, and then flew in the direction that the woman had told him to go. As he was surrounded by the yellow clouds, there was a limit to how much Han Sun could see, so he made use of his Dongxian area to try to detect nearby objects and energies. There was nothing notable about the direction in which he was flying. As far as he could tell, there were just more clouds. One thing that might have been different from other places within the Tianxia system, however, was the distinct lack of xenogenics. Han Sun continued flying in the direction the woman had instructed him to go, and he didn't deviate. And lo and behold, After 3 or 4 hours he saw a light ahead. The light was like the sun in the twilight hours. It was a deep red, and it looked like a big lantern on the horizon. Just as the woman said, he knew it when he saw it. When Han's son found the light, it was as if the light had found him too. It flew over towards Han's son, enveloping him in its glow. Han's son remembered what the woman said, and he didn't make a peep. The light spun around him for a while, but eventually lost interest. A few minutes later it flew away. Han's son felt some modicum of relief. He caught up to the light though, and he followed it from behind. The light was pretty slow, but it also drifted back and forth. It didn't stick to a fixed trajectory or direction. It went left, right, forward, and back. Han's son was confused, but he still followed it. Luckily, the wandering light didn't seem to be leading him into danger. As he flew, he still didn't notice any nearby xenogeneics. After following the light for half a day, he suddenly saw a giant shadow ahead. When he peered at it a little more intently, he noticed that the shadow was actually another island. That made him happy. When Han's son got a bit closer, he noticed that the island was indeed the same as the woman's island. Even all the plant life was identical. The light went to the island and settled down upon the grass like it was sleeping. Han's son came down to the island as well. As he came close, the heavy gravity dragged him down to the surface. He certainly couldn't fly on this version of the island. That mattered little to Han's son though. He walked towards the mountain at the island's center, and it wasn't long before he came before its foothills. There were some stone stairs carved into the familiar rocks, and so Han's son walked all the way up them. There was no wooden house or garden on the small peak. A weird black symbol was carved into the side of the peak. He couldn't tell what it was. Han's son guessed that might have been the restriction of the island. If he destroyed it, then the woman might be freed. Han's son had no reason to hesitate. The Geno universe was messy enough, and the woman was just one of the many beings that lived there. It didn't matter if she was good or bad. Han's son pulled out his ghost teeth knife and used it to swipe the mountaintop. He wanted to cut through it, but when the teeth power hit the mountain, that symbol glowed with a deep light. The teeth power vanished. The blade of the ghost teeth knife still struck the mountain, however, carving a mark across the stone. Han's son slashed a few more times, and aside from the physical strikes of the weapon, no other powers could damage the stone. The symbol carved into the mountain seemed to just consume any powers that came against it. If I have to keep slashing and slashing like this, how long is this going to take? Han's son thought gloomily. He tried to cut through the symbol on the mountain first to see if he could remove it. But when he tried to strike the symbol, it seemed to sink down into the stone, rather than remaining on the surface. He couldn't tell how deep it might have sunk beneath the surface. Han's son didn't know what to do, so he just kept striking the peak of the mountain. Luckily, no dangerous creatures had appeared to harass him. Despite all the loud noises ringing from the stone mountain, no hidden xenogeneics were waking up from their slumber to come and see the commotion. The light was still resting on the grass too. It didn't seem to care what Han's son did. Han's son kept digging, and before long, he became really sweaty. He felt like a senile old man as he hacked away at the side of the mountain. Luckily, the peak was pretty small. Han's son guessed it might take another 2 days for him to cut all the way through it. After digging for 10 hours straight, Han's son's hard work had opened the peak a little. Nothing happened though, which reinforced Han's son's feeling of security. Dong! Han's son struck again, but when he raised his knife, he saw that blood was leaking from the stone where his knife had just landed. What? Why is the mountain bleeding? Han's son's heart jumped. He took a step back and fell into a defensive position himself. Han's son didn't like the fact that the mountain was bleeding, especially after his time in Do God City. That place had made him afraid of bleeding rocks. Han's son wasn't afraid of having a real fight, but he was unsettled by tricky monsters that mess with people's heads. Ningyu's little green sword had come from a bleeding rock. Han's son still wouldn't dare go close to that terrible thing. As he watched the blood trickle from the rock, Han's son's scalp felt numb. He wasn't frightened exactly, but he felt very uncomfortable. Han's son waited a while, and he noted that only a small volume of blood had trickled out, and no other weird things seemed to be happening. He waved his hand and brushed the blood away from the wall to look at the knife mark. What he saw next chilled him. In the deepest part of the knife mark, Han Sun could see flesh. He didn't know what creature this might have been, but he had cut a wound into it that was a few centimeters long. The blood had been coming out of that wound. Han Sun looked at the wound that had now stopped bleeding, his lips pressed into a tight, bloodless line. He didn't know what the creature inside the mountain was. If it had been dead, it shouldn't have been bleeding. If it was alive, how could that be? It had been buried under an entire mountain. Just the mere thought of that was scary. The wound he had cut into the creature was the only place that Han Sun could see its flesh. He hesitated a bit, but he eventually decided to resume digging. He had already come this far, so he couldn't just give up now. That wasn't his style. Even if the creature was still alive, that didn't matter to him. If it couldn't get out of a mountain, it couldn't have been too horrifyingly strong. Han Sun used his knife to keep digging around the flesh. If he could dig away the rocks that covered it, he might be able to get a better view of the creature. Han Sun dug for a while more, and slowly, the excavation site expanded. Eventually, he uncovered a scrap of yellow cloth. The body part Han Sun had wounded was actually a leg. Han Sun could tell that the leg belonged to a woman. The pants certainly appeared girly. Han Sun frowned, and he kept on digging. More and more parts of the being were starting to be revealed. And soon, Han Sun was able to confirm that it was indeed a woman. He carved carefully into the rock, revealing the woman's white feet. She was wearing yellow pants, and she had very long legs. Her upper body was still inside the mountain, so he couldn't yet tell what she looked like. But he couldn't detect a life force from her body. She was like a corpse. But when Han Sun checked out the wound on her leg again, the cut appeared to have closed. And earlier, she had been bleeding. At this point, Han Sun had no idea if the woman was alive or dead. Han Sun had a sudden and disturbing thought. He used all his strength to dig away the rest of the mountain. More and more parts of the woman became visible. When Han Sun dug her head out and got a look at her face, his eyes opened wide. This woman looked exactly the same as the woman in the wooden house. Even a twin wouldn't look this similar. What's going on? Why is this woman buried here? If this woman is alive, then who is that woman in the wooden house? Han Sun shivered as he thought of all this. But when Han Sun removed the last of the rock that had held the woman in place, she showed no sign of moving. It really did look like she was dead. She wasn't breathing, and she had no heartbeat. But when he glanced at her face, she looked more at peace than anything. She looked as if she was softly asleep. Han Sun examined the woman, but she didn't look sick. She just didn't seem to have a life force. Han Sun placed his power into her, but that quickly proved pointless. He couldn't kickstart her life force. The locks on the stone book were still present as well. So, Han Sun set the woman aside and resumed digging. Han Sun dug steadily through the stone, and it was only a matter of time before he broke through. His hands were getting pretty sore, and he could hardly hold his knife anymore. Xie King is far better suited for this sort of work. With his power, and him yelling "Alu alu alu," it would get done much faster. Han Sun thought as he continued digging. Han Senior. Suddenly, Han Sun heard someone call his name. He was about to answer, but when he opened his mouth, his face paled slightly. He quickly closed it. The woman told him that if he spoke a word he would die. There was no one here anyway, so who could have possibly called him? Is it the body of the woman? Still keeping his jaw firmly shut, Han Sun turned around to observe that woman's body. When he was halfway through his turn he froze. The woman's body had vanished. Han Senior. The voice called out Han Sun's name again. This time, it was right next to his ear too. He even felt a soft wind tickle his cheek. Han Sun didn't speak. He quickly turned around and activated his area. Han Sun caught his breath. The woman was standing not too far behind Han Sun, and she was smiling. Her life force was very strong now, and as far as he could tell, it was identical to that of the woman in the wooden house. He could barely believe that this was the body that had been lying on the ground only moments before. What? We parted ways such a short time ago, and you've already forgotten me? The woman smiled. Han Sun opened his mouth to ask if the woman before him was a human or a ghost, but then he remembered that the other woman had told him that under no circumstances should he speak. He still didn't understand what was up with this other woman, but he didn't talk. He simply looked at her. The woman laughed and said, "You are being careful. I told you that you couldn't talk when you were in the presence of the light. But now that I'm free, you can go ahead and speak." Han-sun still didn't say a word. He just stared at the woman, stunned by how similar the two were. Aside from wearing different clothes, they looked precisely the same. Han-sun really wanted to ask her what was going on, but he didn't dare speak. He thought about it some more, and he decided to write down some words with his ghost teeth knife. "Why are you here? You are being very careful." The woman chuckled darkly. "This is my real body. It was trapped here. What you met earlier was just a doll with my spirit inside it. How else do you think I have managed to live so long? Not many beings from the era of sacred are still alive. Anyone that has survived this long is most likely making use of forbidden skills." Han-sun carved more words into the ground. "You suppressed your body here?" The woman lifted her lips. "I didn't want to hurt myself, so why would I bind myself here? Someone else did this to me, and so my real body was trapped here. But because of that suppression, my body didn't age. It still looks the same as it did back then. Why didn't you find anyone else to dig up your body before me?" Han-sun asked by carving more words. "Are you done yet? If you don't want to go, that's fine. But I'm leaving," the woman said. She proceeded to walk down the mountain. Ignoring Senator Han-sun had almost broken through the entire mountaintop. But the woman was descending quickly from the mountain. She obviously intended to leave the island. He didn't know if he should finish digging or chase after her. Han-sun gritted his teeth and ignored the woman who was leaving the island. He continued digging into the mountain. That woman walked toward the light, and when she reached out to it, the light flew into her hands. Grabbing that light, the woman moved away from the island. Han-sun was shocked. The light had brought him here, and if the woman left with the light, Han-sun didn't know if he would still be able to leave. Han-sun wasn't a saint, and he wasn't close to the woman in the wooden house. He wouldn't give his life up for her. Gritting his teeth, Han-sun went after the departing woman. Han-sun shook his head but didn't speak. He looked at the woman's hand, and he saw that she was still holding the light she had stolen. Han-sun moved a bit closer, and he noticed that the light was actually a red lantern. The woman held the red lantern before her as she traveled through the clouds. She was wearing yellow clothing, but her feet were bare. With the red light shining across her as she flew, she looked very weird. Han-sun followed her from behind, but still he didn't speak. The woman clutched the lantern, continuing to move forward. She was moving much more smoothly than Senator, but just as Han-sun was wondering if the woman knew where they were going, something bright appeared in front of him. They moved out of the clouds and approached an island. Since he couldn't see the peak, Han-sun didn't know which island he was seeing, so he didn't speak. The woman made her way up the mountain, and Han-sun followed her silently. When they were halfway up, Han-sun could feel that the mountain would have no peak. He felt as if there would be a wooden house and a garden. "Are we really back here?" Han-sun thought to himself. He walked all the way to the mountaintop and confirmed his suspicion. The woman walked into the garden, heading for the wooden house. Han-sun followed the woman into the house. Han-sun thought something was amiss. The woman in the wooden house loved to clean, and she had a severe case of OCD. He wasn't allowed to walk in her garden, let alone her house. But Han-sun had followed this woman all the way into the wooden house. She hadn't said a word, and that made Han-sun suspicious. Is she really not that woman? Is this a fake version of the island then? Han-sun frowned as he looked around the wooden house. From the first floor to the second floor, there was no one else except for the woman holding the lantern. Han-sun picked up a pen and wrote on a piece of paper. "Where is your clone doll?" He watched her intently to see what her reaction might suggest. Han-sun didn't really need an answer to this question, but he wanted to see her reaction to him messing with her things. The woman looked at the paper and said, "My real self is free, so my clone is now gone." That sounds untrue, Han-sun thought. The woman hadn't been bothered by Han-sun's use of her pen and paper. That made him really suspicious. Han-sun looked at the stone book and found that it was still locked tightly shut. He hesitated to do so, but he held the book out in front of her. He wrote on the paper, "Can you take a look at this book and help me break these bindings?" "Why would I want to help you?" the woman asked with a raised eyebrow. She didn't accept the book. Han Sen now knew that this version of the woman was fake. The woman had personally given him the stone book. If this woman wearing yellow clothes was real, she would have recognized this book, and she wouldn't have said something like that. What to do? Han Sen frowned. He knew that this woman was fake, but the wooden house was the same. Han Sen wasn't sure how to proceed. Han Sen didn't really care who this woman was. Real or fake, it didn't matter to him. But he didn't want to just leave things like this. There were secrets right in front of his nose, and yet he couldn't uncover them. As Han Sen tried to figure out what to do, he suddenly heard the roar of a big dragon. A giant purple dragon soared through the sky above the island. Atop the giant dragon was a man from the Extreme King. This is really the place. The dragon was too big to land on the island, so it circled overhead. The Extreme King man stood atop the head of the dragon, peering down at the island. Han Sen was shocked, and he thought to himself, the Extreme King have gotten here so quickly? Han Sen didn't recognize this Extreme King man, but he immediately identified the giant dragon beneath the man's feet. Han Sen had never seen it before, but he knew its name. It was the famous Extreme Purple Demon Dragon. It was deified, and it was a mount for the king's brother Meng Lai. Meng Lai was King Bai's biological brother, and he had become deified a long time ago. He was one of the top 10 elites of the Extreme King. If even the likes of Meng Lai had come to the Tianxia system to hunt down Han Sen, that showed just how much they wanted him dead. But Han Sen couldn't blame the Extreme King. The king's son had been murdered. If Han Sen didn't pay for what he had done, then the dignity and pride of the Extreme King and King Bai would be forever tarnished. Han Sen, I know you are here. Do you want to come out by your own volition, or do you want me to come down there and drag you out? Meng Lai boomed from the air, staring down at the wooden house. Han Sen's heart began to pound. He knew the Extreme King would come after he sent the video, but he hadn't thought they would arrive so quickly. Han Sen had expected the demon spirit to be nearby when the Extreme King arrived, so they would have to deal with him before they could focus on Han Senator. But in a surprising turn of events, the demon spirit had yet to appear. Two deifieds have come looking for you. It seems as if you're in over your head. The woman looked at Han Sen with interest. Before Han Sen could answer, the Extreme Purple Demon Dragon beneath Meng Lai gathered up a sphere of dragon power. It turned itself into a being of purple fire. It was going to smite the island and turn it to ash. The woman's face hardened, and the light of the red lantern she was holding grew brighter. The red light covered the whole island, intercepting the purple fireball. The dragon's attack was unable to penetrate the light. The purple fire burned fiercely, and the red light wavered, but it still managed to shield the island from the power of the fire. The purple fire was incredibly wild, but it couldn't make it past the shield. The Extreme Purple Demon Dragon became incredibly angry. It spat out more of that purple fire, but try as it might, it couldn't displace the red light. The woman was unshaken. She raised her lantern and put her hand inside it. When she pulled her hand back out of it, Han Sen saw there was a little flame flickering atop her fingers. The woman flicked it at the Extreme Purple Demon Dragon that hovered in the sky. That small flame shot upward, rising until it hit the dragon. Boom! Han Sen watched what looked like a nuclear bomb going off. The giant body of the Extreme Purple Demon Dragon was engulfed by a bright red sea of fire. The monster was transformed into a big burning fireball. It squealed in pain, and its wings flapped madly as it tried to put out the fire that was ravaging it. But the more it flapped, the more the fire burned. Han Sen was frozen. As a fire-aligned deified xenogeniac, the Extreme Purple Demon Dragon should have been able to eat fire for breakfast. Instead, it was burning in intense pain. It was difficult to imagine how terrifying that tiny flame must have been. The woman stood as calmly as if nothing spectacular had happened. She continued to hold the big red lantern, and she stood in front of the window, looking up at the Extreme Purple Demon Dragon and Meng Lai. Suddenly, Han Sen saw Meng Lai roll up his sleeves. Then it was like the man turned into a black hole. The red fire on the Extreme Purple Demon Dragon was sucked into that black hole, and it all disappeared. There wasn't even a whiff of smoke remaining. Meng Lai is very powerful, Han Sen thought to himself. Who are you? Why are you protecting a fugitive like Han Sun? Meng Lai stood atop the head of the extreme purple demon dragon's head, looking down at the woman near the window. He frowned. This is my house, the woman said simply. You cannot just come here and attempt to burn it down, killing as you please. Meng Lai looked at the woman in the same way. Han Sun has a deep grudge with the Extreme King. The Extreme King will make him pay with his blood. If you would grant me access to your abode, we will greatly appreciate it. And what if I don't? The woman wasn't pleased by Meng Lai's tone. Meng Lai had asked her to stay out of the way, but it had sounded more like a command. There was no room for maneuvering or negotiation. Then I will forge my own path. The Extreme King are here now, and no one can stop me, Meng Lai said imperiously. Hearing Meng Lai say that, Han Sun almost burst out laughing. The Extreme King had enough power to suppress many races, and all of the top 10 deifieds of the Extreme King were a serious threat. But Meng Lai had just condescended to the wrong person. This woman had come from the era of the sacred leader. The Extreme King's alpha had been merely a servant to a woman like this, once upon a time. And now, an heir of the Extreme King was talking down to her in such a manner. Han Sun knew what she was going to do, just judging from the man's disrespectful tone of voice. The Extreme King must be really powerful. I am keen to see how you, a scion of the Extreme King, will build a path that cuts right through me, the woman said, her voice dripping with contempt. Meng Lai frowned. The Extreme King were one of the most famous races in the universe, and they had been for a very long time. Furthermore, Meng Lai was the brother of the king. Aside from those of the very high or the ancient god, no one ever dared to speak to them in such a way. Humph. Meng Lai flipped his hands out and started to push toward the island. The hand became a big print that suddenly covered the whole shield. A hellish godlight burned from the print. It turned into an old word that read king, and it was infused with powers for crushing the sky and the ground. The clouds of the Tianxia system shook because of that word. The clouds nearby were all rolling, and space was tearing and coming undone under the force of the large print. The whole area had become a dangerous maelstrom of destructive power. In Han Sen's eyes, it was like the whole world was being flattened by that unstoppable word. The island was going to get crushed like an egg. You stole the world print, and now you have the gall to show it off here? The woman looked up with disdain. She raised her hands, and a small print appeared on her fingers. She threw it at the big print that was coming down toward the island. The small print and the big print collided. Weird symbols flashed across the smaller print. Han Sun couldn't tell what the symbols meant, but the sight of them was disconcerting. It was like the universe's destiny now resided in that little print. Boom! The small print hit the big print. Then the scary big print shattered. It couldn't repel the small print. How is that possible? Meng Lai's face changed. His king print could suppress the sky and earth, and no race should have been able to stop it. But now, a much smaller print had been able to crush it. It was a sight that beggared belief. Han Sun had used his purple eye butterfly to observe the conflict. The woman's small print had a similar structure to the big print, but the smaller variant's power was much denser. They looked roughly the same, but when they ran into each other, it was like refined steel going up against baked clay. The world-shocking king print shattered. It couldn't compare to the woman's world print. The small print broke the world-shocking king print. And after that, it continued on its course towards Meng Lai. The print didn't become any bigger, but it did seem like the world was becoming smaller instead, shrinking under the twisted power of the print. The influence of the print seemed to spread over everything around them. Meng Lai's jaw tightened. Several gold substance chains flew from his body, assembling themselves into a big hand that was poised to strike back against the little print. But the big hand broke when it came into contact with that print. All the substance chains snapped too. It was impossible to repel the power of that small print. Seeing that the little print was about to suppress him, Meng Lai shouted. Golden light burst from him. His body turned gold as his muscles expanded, and his armor buckled and broke as his body grew too large for it to contain. In the next second, Meng Lai's hand gripped the extreme purple demon dragon's head. The gold of his body affected the extreme purple demon dragon, and the dragon began turning gold as well. Meng Lai roared. He was holding the extreme purple demon dragon up. He lifted it, like a dancing ant holding up an elephant. Meng Lai heaved the dragon toward the small world print that was headed his way, and when the dragon left his hands, it became a draconic lance. It struck the small world print, and it managed to knock the small world print away. Han Sen was shocked by this, and he wondered, what kind of power is this? A deified xenogenic turned into a lance? The woman looked at Meng Lai in surprise. The weapon part of Geno world speech used in conjunction with bloodline spirit body metal element. They can be combined? It looks like these slaves have something decent in them, after all. What are you talking about? This is my Extreme King's Golden Soldier King body. Geno world speech? You are full of crap. Meng Lai snarled. Then he swung the gold dragon lance at the woman. The gold dragon lance was burning with purple dragon fire. The dragon lance's metal slid forward, ripping the fabric of space as it appeared in front of the woman. The woman looked at the gold dragon lance with interest. She summoned a small world print in front of her to block the gold dragon lance. The print was small, but as far as the lance was concerned, the print might as well have been as big as a planet. No matter how scary the lance's dragon fire was, it was drawn magnetically to the print. The attack couldn't go past the woman's shield. Meng Lai kept his grip on the heart of the gold dragon. He continued to roar and sprint forward with the gold dragon lance, thrusting it into the little world print. The lance's dragon firepower kept being driven into the small print spell. Get lost! When Meng Lai roared, the gold dragon lance finally pierced through the small print. It exploded, and then space cracked. The gold dragon lance roared with Meng Lai, and it shot forward toward the woman's eyebrow. The woman looked shocked, and she didn't move. The raging dragon fire of the gold lance punched a hole straight through her skull. But her body simply exploded. And then, the body of another woman appeared behind Meng Lai. Moon doppelganger and teleportation? Han Sen was frozen by the sight. This was the first time he had seen another person fight like this. The woman's moon doppelganger was a little different from Han Sen's, but it was based on the same concept. However, the woman's moon doppelganger was clearer, and her teleportation didn't cause a ripple in space. It wasn't like when Han Sen used his dragon wings and gathered up power. The woman's enemies would have no warning that she was about to teleport. Not until she appeared behind them, at least. What a scary woman. If I could teleport like that, I would have a much higher chance of success when fighting strong enemies. It had been a long time since Han Sen had made use of break space flash with his dragon wings. It was still teleportation, but its range was too short and it took too long to cast. It wasn't suitable for king-class fights. After all, the dragon wings were a mutant Marquis xenogenic gene. It couldn't keep up with the needs of a king-class battle. Meng Lai reacted quickly. He flipped the gold dragon lance, and the lance fire was like a roaring gold dragon as it headed for the woman behind him. Pang! The woman's body broke again, but she appeared next to Meng Lai, muttering to herself, I underestimated this race of slaves. This gold soldier king body is quite interesting. Meng Lai's eyes were on fire. He couldn't bear listening to her. He looked like some deranged demon god as he swung the gold dragon lance. Anything the lance touched was incinerated by the fire it carried. The sea of clouds was vaporized, and substance chains of gold dragon fire roared across the sky. These deified elites are too strong. Meng Lai is forcing another deified creature to be his weapon. He's wielding it like any other weapon. And the woman is practically fighting two deified elites. Han Sen felt lust rise inside him as he watched the display of power. If he could gain that power and a group of deified creatures at his disposal, no one could defeat him. Against the rampaging gold dragon lance, the woman could only use clones and her ability of teleportation to fight. But Han Sen could still tell that the woman had some extra tricks up her sleeve. She wasn't trying to escape. More than anything, it looked as if she was admiring his gold soldier king body. Meng Lai noticed this too. In his fury, he sped up his attacks even more. The substance chains were like dragon fire chewing up the sky and the daytime. He wanted to grind the woman into dust. But his efforts were futile. The woman's teleportation capabilities were so good. It was like she had a frameshift drive installed. She shifted position so fast that it seemed like she was everywhere at once. It didn't matter how strong Meng Lai was because he couldn't touch a single hair upon her head. Meng Lai was unable to touch the woman. His eyes opened wide, and he began thrusting the gold dragon lance toward the island. The lance fire became a roaring gold dragon that came for the island. It looked like one bite was all it would take to devour the entire island. The lantern was still on the island, and it was glowing red. It protected the island, but the red light couldn't withstand the lance's power forever. The lance's fire broke the red light, and the dragon fire covered the sky and the earth. Han Sen suddenly felt very anxious. This was the power of two deified beings doing battle. Perhaps the island could withstand it, but Han Sen and the wooden house wouldn't be able to. The wooden house held many Geno arts, too, and they were at risk of being destroyed. Han Sen wasn't overly concerned about them though. Having a bunch of great Geno arts would be useless if he died. He turned around and started to leave the house, but the dragon fire suddenly disappeared. He raised his head. The gold dragon lance had stopped moving. It was hanging over the island, and the woman's bare, pale feet rested lightly atop the weapon. Nice timing. Meng Lai had been unable to hit the woman, and so he had decided to strike the island instead. Now that the woman was where he wished her to be, the gold substance chains danced. The gold dragon lance was imbued with gold fire. It roared like a giant dragon, and it prepared to lash out at her. Gold Soldier King body, huh? Now I understand. The woman still stood upon the lance. She smiled faintly. As the lance's gold dragon fire exploded, a white light surrounded her feet. The light was contagious, and it infected the gold dragon lance. The gold dragon lance changed color, transforming into a white metal dragon lance. Pang! The woman's bare feet stood firmly upon the lance. And then, the white dragon lance exploded with a dragon light. It blasted Meng Lai, and he let go of the weapon. The white dragon lance flew away from him, then spun and landed in the woman's hands. Impossible! How do you have the Gold Soldier King body? Meng Lai stared at the woman who was holding the dragon lance. It was like he had seen a ghost. The woman held the white dragon lance loosely in one hand. She swung it almost casually, sending it to strike Meng Lai. The dragon fire of the lance was just like the fire Meng Lai himself had been employing. Meng Lai's face paled. He didn't dare fight the wrathful power of that dragon lance. He stumbled back and cast some gold substance chains, creating a gold shield in front of himself. But the power of that dragon lance was too scary. It pierced right through the shield, and it was headed for Meng Lai. Han Sen wasn't surprised that the woman could use these abilities though. He had heard about this before when he saw the woman read the shocking world record of the Extreme King. The Extreme King had stolen her Geno world speech, and combined portions of it with the Blood Pulse spirit body. Even the Extreme King's basic shocking world record had been stolen from the woman. It was not weird that she was able to employ the Gold Soldier King body, but the proficiency with which the woman wielded the extreme purple demon dragon was intimidating. Meng Lai was considered quite strong among the deified elites, but upon meeting a monster like this woman, he lost his cool. After losing his lance, he stopped fighting. When he found a chance to flee, he took it. He didn't dare to continue fighting the woman. He wasn't going to get the extreme purple demon dragon back either. Why did you let him run? Han Sen asked quickly when he saw that the woman hadn't stopped Meng Lai from escaping. As soon as the words left his mouth, he clamped his jaw shut. He had been watching the fight so intently, he had forgotten about the fact that he wasn't supposed to be talking. But nothing bad happened after Han Sen spoke. The woman landed in the garden, and she said smoothly, "My body has just been freed, and I'm still very weak. If he kept fighting, I doubt I would have been able to kill him. So this is you in a weak state." Han Sen was frozen. Weird. I spoke out loud, and yet nothing has happened. Is this the real woman? Why didn't she recognize the stone book? And what happened to her OCD? Han Sen looked at the woman. Try as he might, he couldn't determine if she was real or fake. There was something else Han Sen was wondering about too. The fight had been conducted on a mind-blowing scale, and Han Sen was still feeling the aftershocks. But despite that, the demon spirit hadn't appeared. Why didn't it show up? The woman returned to the wooden house, and placed a crystal shield over it. Han Sen had seen the woman use this skill several times, but as he watched her use it now, he realized that he had underestimated its utility. The crystal shield enveloped the wooden house, and then it became smaller. The wooden house shrank as well. A few seconds later, the crystal had become an egg-sized ball resting in the woman's hand. The wooden house was inside it, safe and sound. "Let's go," the woman said. Lifting her lantern and speaking to Han's senator, she turned to leave the island. "Such a ruckus. Why didn't the demon spirit show up?" Hansen asked casually as he followed the woman. "I am free. He won't dare show himself to me now," the woman said flatly. Hansen couldn't be certain if she was telling the truth, so he asked her directly, "Why were you freed so easily? Was this the first time you asked someone to help you?" The woman's hands moved, and the dragon lance turned into a white dragon boat. She sat on the dragon boat and said, "You think Two World Mountain can be accessed by just anyone? I don't know how you gained access, but if other people could do what you did, I would have been released long ago. You don't know how I got here?" Han Sun looked at the woman strangely. The woman smiled and said, "Is that odd? Two World Mountain is between two worlds. Although the other woman was my clone, I was unable to interact with her while I was bound. I don't have her memories. And when I was freed, she should have become a doll whose strings were cut. I cannot recollect her memories. How did you know it was me who saved you then?" As soon as Han Sun asked that, he realized that the question was stupid. The woman still answered, "If it wasn't for my clone, how would you have known that you needed to follow my two-world lantern? And how would you have known not to talk on the two-world path? You really would have died otherwise. The two-world mountain restrictions had broken, which was what allowed you and the Extreme King Guy to gain access to Two-World Mountain." Han Sun eyed the woman, trying to see if she was telling the truth. Her story did sound rather plausible. He went silent for a while, and then he brought out the stone book. "Your clone said that if I saved her, the bindings of this stone book would be broken. Why is it still closed then?" The woman looked at the stone book and said, "The book has a world print, so it wouldn't open automatically. Even if the book was destroyed, no one could open it. No one aside from me, that is." "Then can you open it?" Han Sun didn't understand what she was saying, but if she knew how to unlock the book, then that would be great. Without speaking, the woman casually cast a small world print. A stamp appeared on the stone book's cover. A mysterious symbol glowed briefly, and then the stone book's invisible power was broken. The book could now be opened. Hansen couldn't wait to open the stone book. The words inside the book jumped around, as if they were alive. They looked like fairies, and they flew towards the woman's forehead. They all vanished into her eyebrows. When the woman saw the fairy-like symbols, she appeared surprised. And then she understood. She sat upon the boat, allowing all the words to flow into her forehead. "Oh shit, I have been tricked." Han Sun suddenly understood. After the stone book's words all flew out, the stone book crumbled into sand that slipped through Han Sen's fingers. The woman absorbed all the words and then smiled at Han Sr. "Thank you for bringing me my clone's memories. You want to know what test the sacred leader conducted, right?" Hansen nodded. The stone book hadn't contained his answer. It was filled with the memories of the clone. The woman was sitting at the front of the boat. She put a hand under her chin and looked up to the sky. The sacred leader was very powerful, but his lifespan was quite short. He would only live a few hundred years. It couldn't be compared to those that could live for 10,000 years, 1,000,000 years, or even 1,000,000,000 years. He tried his hardest to find a way to live forever, even forcing himself through multiple rebirths. But eventually, he still reached his life's end. Trying to stay alive, the sacred leader conducted many tests. Then one day, a man who called himself God came to sacred leader. Sacred leader made a wish? Han Sun looked at the woman with shock. The woman shook her head. No. Sacred leader was a very self-confident person. If he wanted to achieve immortality, he would find it by himself. He wouldn't make a wish to another creature. Han Sun didn't speak. He listened to the woman, hanging on every word. After so long spent searching, he was finally touching the center of this mystery. The woman sighed and said, "Sacred leader didn't want to make a wish. Instead, he wanted to kill God. But no matter what power he tried to use, he couldn't damage God. He couldn't even ruffle that being's clothing. You can't imagine how shocked Sacred Leader was. He ruled practically the entire universe. And yet, he couldn't deal a speck of damage to this creature claiming to be God. But this self-proclaimed God was also restricted by some sort of power. He couldn't kill Sacred Leader either. But after that encounter, Sacred Leader poured all his strength into finding out what sort of creature that God was. Many things happened, and in the end, Sacred Leader did manage to kill one. What? Sacred Leader killed a god? Hansen asked, his voice going hoarse as his throat tightened. The woman shook her head. It wasn't really a god. It was more of a statue. It was like a statue that was controlled by God. Hansen thought about that god inside Destiny's Tower. It was a statue, more of a representation than an actual god like King June. After destroying the statue, Sacred Leader conducted some tests. He discovered, to his shock, that his lifespan had increased when he absorbed some power from the statue. Sacred Leader became incredibly excited. And he thought, if killing a statue of God added that much to my lifespan, what would happen if I killed a real one? The woman smiled. And so Sacred Leader continued researching how he might kill God. But after his statue was destroyed, that God hated him and wanted him dead. Sacred Leader was unable to kill God. But God was also unable to kill Sacred Leader. They were fighting indirectly, so to speak. When the time came for Sacred Leader to actually battle God, all of us were incredibly excited. And yet, at the same time, that began the period of our greatest suffering. Saying this, the woman sighed. Not all the members of Sacred shared Sacred Leader's vision. When he fought with God, Sacred Leader's family, friends, subordinates, and even spouses all betrayed him for God. And they put Sacred Leader in a difficult position. Sacred Leader's research of the story of genes was at a dead end. No one could practice the story of genes, so there was no super gene that could threaten God. And by then, Sacred Leader's lifespan had come to an end. And then God destroyed Sacred and killed Sacred Leader? Hansen asked. The woman shook her head. I don't know. Before that happened, I was already entombed in Two World Mountain. By that time, Sacred Leader had lost everyone. Sacred was unable to hold itself together. So its collapse was only a matter of time. When Hansen heard this, he sighed. Sacred Leader was so strong, but not even he could defeat God? That isn't quite accurate. But at the very least, he let us know that God can be resisted, the woman said. Right. So, why were you sealed inside Two World Mountain? Hansen actually wanted to ask if she had also been tempted by God and made a wish, but he quickly decided not to. The woman's face changed. With a stony face, she said, That's none of your business. I've paid my debt in full now. I've told you everything, so you can leave. Hansen's heart jumped, and he thought, this woman was encased in the stone of Two World Mountain. It must have something to do with the demon spirit. That woman carved into the sea demon car has to be her. Hansen had these ideas rattling in his head, but he didn't try to confirm them. He told her, I have known you for so long, but I don't know your name. The woman looked at Hans Sr. What are you hanging around for? Get lost. There was nothing Hansen could say to that, so he left the dragon boat. When he turned around to look at the woman, the dragon boat had soared into space and disappeared. Where she went, he had no idea. Even in Sacred Leaders, people were already fighting against these things claiming to be God. But it does seem as if God wins every time. Hansen closed his eyes and continued to think. When Sacred was destroyed, did Sacred Leader die? The sanctuaries were a place for the Sacred Leader to research immortal spirits. The crystallizers later adopted the realm. Why didn't any other races take over the sanctuaries? Why were the crystallizers the only ones who could? Did the crystallizers know the secrets of the sanctuaries? Maybe. The woman said that the crystallizers were tests, and that they were very smart. They must have known a few of Sacred's secrets for sure. Hansen thought about this, and then his eyes brightened. That should mean that the crystallizers continued Sacred Leader's research. But what exactly was it that the Sacred Leader researched? Spirits, beasts, souls, xenogeniacs? The crystallizers didn't seem to know exactly what they were doing. Their bodies were too weak. so they probably wanted to use the sanctuaries to make their bodies stronger. But sacred leaders' research couldn't have been for such a simple purpose. I have learned so much. I now know the beginning and the end of the story. All I am missing are some of the details regarding the middle. And I also know more about the story of genes now, so that should come in handy for my practice. Han Sen felt a lot of relief, and he thought he was close to getting all the answers he needed. Han Sen looked around until he figured out where he was, and then he started heading back to the White Whale. He had to get back to Bauer. Han Sen soon realized the Tianxia system was way too big. Sticking to one direction was nearly impossible, and there were clouds everywhere he looked. He couldn't even see where he was going. While he was trying to decide which way to head, he saw the shape of a few shadows. Several king-class people were flying through the clouds. Bar. Han Sen was shocked when he saw this shadow. It was Bar. But Bar wasn't with Dia Robber this time. There were people of many different races with him. Han Sen. When Bar saw Han Sen, he looked ecstatic. Everyone sped up to reach Han Senator, seeing their faces. Han Sen immediately knew they were coming after him. There was a 90% chance they were after him for the Extreme King's bounty. Han Sen hesitated. He activated his Wuxia Rubik's Cube and connected his video stream with the treasure identifier elder. Han Sen, I have been looking for you for so long. Bar rushed towards Han Sen, pulled out his knife and slashed. Although Bar was a hybrid of the destroyed, his talents were scarier than most of the full-blooded destroyed. On top of that, he was practically immortal. As long as his cells were not completely eradicated, he could be reborn through his remaining genes. And each time his body was obliterated, he came back stronger. He was sort of like a cockroach that never died. Bar had already killed many half-deified people who were stronger than him on paper. Han Sen had battled him once before, but he was unable to finish the maniac off. After the treasure identifier elder received the video, the stream was distributed across all media stations. He played the video for all to see. It wasn't a live stream though. It had been modified by treasure identifier elder and his team before it was played across all the broadcasting networks. There was a bit of a delay so it could be processed, but most people considered it a live stream anyway. Considering the content that the 1,000 treasures had delivered with their two most recent broadcasts, most of the broadcasting networks gave the treasure identifier elder airtime immediately. There had been amazing viewership numbers for the past two broadcasts, so this video didn't need to go through the normal approval process. In moments, the broadcast was playing on screens throughout the Geno universe. Tego Geno Fluid. It makes you strong like the Tego. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first broadcasting station in the Tianxia system. Here is the video of Han Sen's capture. The show that was on air suddenly stopped. Many people were angry, but when they saw what was playing now, their eyes widened and locked on the screen. Isn't that Bar from the Destroyed? And Shadow from the Storm? And look, there is Thunder from Thundersnake. They've surrounded Han Sr. He deserves it. He was streaming with the Wuxia Rubik's Cube when he fled. He deserves to die. Bar is going up to him. So powerful. No wonder Bar is so famous. The power in his strikes can destroy small planets. What do you know? That's called the destroyed god light. If you get caught in a beam of that light, you or any other creature would just die. You guys don't know shit. The destroyed god light isn't Bar's strongest move. The amazing thing about Bar is his immortal body. He can't be killed. Even if Han Sen does defeat Bar, Bar won't stop coming. Plus other elites are there as well. Han Sen won't get away today. Everyone was watching and discussing the content. Bar was the most famous member of the hunting party, but the other kings were very good too. Especially Shadow and Thunder. They belonged to some of the less famous higher races. Still, as individuals they weren't weak. They could easily compete with the best geniuses of most races. Plus, Shadow and Thunder were half-deified. That was one step greater than Bar. So in terms of power, they exceeded him. While everyone watched this, Bar's bone knife suddenly lunged towards Han Sen's head. A scary destroyed knife light shot forward to strike Han Senator. Han Sen jerked to the side, dodging the thrust of the bone knife, and throwing a punch into Bar's chest. Good hit, Bar shouted. He then threw his left fist collide with Han Sen's. Pang! Two fists struck each other, releasing a powerful shockwave. The clouds rose and washed away, as if they had transformed into a tsunami. Han Sen didn't budge, but Bar was sent flying. When he came to a stop 10 meters away, his face changed. Some sort of ice was spreading over his fist, and it moved up his arms to cover his entire body. Bar opened his mouth to shout, but his body became a block of ice before he had the chance. Inside the ice, Bar was in that angry roaring position. He could make no noise though. Han Sen shot past Bar, not even sparing a glance at his frozen opponents. He went after the other kings. Shadow, who was of the storm race, came at Han Sen first. Her body was like a typhoon as she surged toward Han Senator. He couldn't even make out her body within the chaos. A scary storm was coming for Han Sen's body. The wind of that storm was like a flurry of sharp weapons that could shred the fabric of space. Han Sen's body was cut to pieces within seconds. Is that all it took to bring Han Sen down? Shadow emerged from her artificial typhoon, and after seeing Han Sen's body in bloody bits, she laughed darkly. The next second, though, Shadow froze. Han Sen's shattered body disappeared into thin air. Shadow knew that was bad, but the realization came too late. Han Sen's face appeared in front of her, and he threw a punch into her belly. Pang! The punch that slammed into Shadow's stomach sent her soaring through the air. Although she had the protection of wind, she was still frozen solid by Han Sen's ice. Before her descent was complete, she was an ice sculpture. Thunder's jaw went slack when he saw what had happened, but he didn't slow his approach. When he got close enough to Han Sen, he used his king area. Thunder and lightning boomed and struck in the immediate proximity, covering all corners of the area. Han Sen was suddenly surrounded by a furious storm, and his body was drowning amidst the thunder. Pure attacking areas were the easiest to deal with, but they were also the hardest to deal with. Pure physical attacks were easy enough if you could block them, but if they were used against someone who was weak to their element, they could be extremely deadly. There was no middle ground against something like this. Inside the radius of that area, there was nowhere to run. Han Sen could only use his own body to fight back what came his way. That thunder area isn't the strongest I've seen, but Thunder himself is half deified. Han Sen, on the other hand, has only just become a king. He can't have moved beyond the first or second tiers. Han Sen won't last long within an area that powerful, a king said, as he watched the video. After he said that though, a hole was torn straight through the thunder area. Han Sen came out from that ocean of electricity with lightning snapping and crackling all around him. It didn't touch his body. Han Sen was holding a spike of lightning. He ran in front of Thunder and tried to stab him with the spike. Thunder was holding a spiral of electricity. He lifted the bolt of pure lightning to collide with Han Senator, but when the lightning touched Han Sen, it looked as if the lightning itself had actually been electrified. He almost dropped the lightning spiral. Pang! Han Sen's left hand punched Thunder in the chest. Thunder was immediately sent flying. His body quickly became another icy statue like the others. In minutes, Bar, Shadow and Thunder, three king elites, had been frozen stiff by Han Senator. They were all shocked. The two other kings who had come after Han Sen were shocked as well. They were 8th or 9th tier kings. They weren't as talented as Bar, or half deified like Shadow and Thunder. If those three powerful people had already been frozen by Han Sen, they wouldn't dare compound their mistake by trying to fight Han Sen themselves. They turned around to run, but it was too late. Han Sen flashed by them. Both of the areas emitted by those kings were broken, and they were turned into ice statues just like Bar and the others. While it might have taken some time to describe, in reality, the fight was over in moments. Han Sen managed to freeze two half-deifieds and three kings in a few steps. Am I seeing this right? Thunder and Shadow, both of whom are half-deified, were frozen? Bar is still frozen too. Are crystallizers really this strong? This is too cool. One punch, one person. He beat two half-deified people and three kings. No wonder he was able to murder a prince of the extreme king. Since when have the bodies of crystallizers evolved with such speed? Weren't the crystallizers heavily reliant on technology? It doesn't seem like a pure cold power though. If it was so simple, Bar and Thunder wouldn't be completely sealed in the way they are. The whole universe was shocked by what Han Sen had done. Sealing 5 powerful kings in mere moments was an impressive feat. No one had seen that coming. This guy is getting stronger and stronger. I've got to get better myself, Lin Feng said, upon seeing Han Sen's fight on his phone. His eyes were sparkling as he walked toward a xenogeniac-infested mountain. Wang Yuhang had a Ghana woman in his arms at the time, and he was enjoying himself with scrumptious foods and fine wines. Back during the Geno Scroll fights, he had bet all his money on Dollar being victorious. That gamble had an enormous payoff, so now he was able to afford many of the things he wanted. That really passes me off. Out of all of us, why is Han Sen the only one who's so famous? No. I need to do a live stream of myself. I want the rednecks of this Geno universe to see how great I am by comparison, Wang Yuhang said, as he watched Han Sen seal Bar and 4 other people. The girls around him were also watching Han Sen's fight, screaming in glee with every new attack. It soured Wang Yuhang's mood even further. Not bad. He's almost entered my league. If he keeps on working hard, he might reach 30% of my power, Xie King said. He was wearing dark sunglasses, and he had a bottle of beer in his hand. He was focused on flying his expensive aircraft, but he also had a pen and paper next to him. As he flew, a person's image suddenly appeared on the ship's monitor. It was a worker from the Thousand Treasures Alliance. After seeing Xie King, he smiled and said, "Boss Xie King, did you finish your 3rd comic yet? The whole universe is waiting for the threequel to your overbearing President Love Luo saga." Arg. Hey, Arg, what? What are you? Oh, the signal is bad. Arg, magnetic storm. Oh no. Oh no. Xie King said. Then he slammed his phone closed. What kind of artist would hit a deadline and hand their work in on time? Xie King took a sip of his drink and returned to watching Han Sen fight. In the Extreme King, a ghost-like body was emerging from an empty mountain. It walked into the underworld, traveled through King's Kingdom, and headed for the Tianxia system. I don't care if you are Bai Yi or Han Senator, I'm going to beat you this time, Bai Wuchang said to himself excitedly as he traversed the depths of space. After Han Sen froze Bar and the other 4, he intended to steal any good items they were carrying. A wave of unease washed through him though. The smile left his face, and he hurled the Wanjia Rubik's Cube away from him. The moment Han Sen threw the Wanjia Rubik's Cube, a needle-like blade materialized from the image display of the Wanjia Rubik's Cube. The thin blade flew right past Han Sen's cheek. A black shadow followed that blade coming from the Wanjia Rubik's Cube. A person grabbed the Wanjia Rubik's Cube and gave Han Sen a toothy grin. "Who are you?" Han Sen asked the weird creature that had emerged from the Wanjia Rubik's Cube. A frown furrowed his brow. The creature had the body of a human, but the head of a sheep. Bat-like wings spread from his back. He had scales, and their black color glistened. "I'm Shadow Ghost," the weird creature said, playing with the Wanjia Rubik's Cube as he spoke. The Wanjia Rubik's Cube was still active, and many of the viewers froze in their seats when they heard Shadow Ghost's name. Shadow Ghost came from the pirates. Although he was only half deified, his name struck fear into the hearts of many. Even many deified elites were wary of this being. Shadow Ghost came from a rare race, but his talents were deadly enough to strike fear into many people of the higher races. As long as a video was being filmed in a real place, Shadow Ghost could enter that video and travel to wherever it was being filmed. That was what he did when he came out of the recording Wanjia Rubik's Cube. But that wasn't the scariest thing about him. Once Shadow Ghost entered a video, he could reveal himself at any time without warning. Imagine talking to your good friend or flirting with your lover, and then suddenly, a sword came out of the video chat and skewered you. Not many people could react to the threat swiftly enough to save themselves. God only knew how many kings or half-deifieds had been killed in such a way by Shadow Ghost. Many people were never even aware of how they died. It was pretty hard to prevent. Shadow Ghost is onto him. Han Sen is in danger. No way. How did Han Sen react so quickly earlier? He was holding his Wanjia Rubik's Cube close to his body, but he still somehow avoided Shadow Ghost's sneak attack? Yeah. Han Sen just froze 5 powerful enemies. After that, he should have been relaxed and off guard. But he actually avoided the strike. Did he dodge out of instinct? Or did he somehow know what was coming? Either way, it's pretty scary. Shadow Ghost spun the Wuxia Rubik's Cube in his palm. As he stared at Han Senator, he chuckled grimly. There's no grudge between us, and no one has directly hired me to kill you. However, the bounty being offered by the Extreme King is far too tempting. Today, I will have to trouble myself to kill you. Han's son had never heard of Shadow Ghost, so he didn't know who he was. But seeing him emerge from the video of the Wuxia Rubik's Cube, Han's son knew what sort of powers he had. You were unable to kill me earlier. What makes you think you can take me on now? Hansen asked, raising an eyebrow. You think that was all the power I have? Let me show you my real shadow area. After that, Shadow Ghost pulled out another camera with his free hand. There was a loud clicking noise as the camera flashed. Hansen tried to dodge, but he didn't know where the power was coming from, so he had no idea which direction to move in. After the flash, Hansen's body simply disappeared. The Shadow Ghost camera displayed an image of Han Senator, but in the picture, Hansen was able to move and talk. It was like a laptop. The flash had made Hansen feel as if things were all dreamy, and that he was drifting in space. Everything around him was gray, and there was a shadow in front of him that he could barely see. That shadow was Shadow Ghost. Han-san, look where you are. Shadow Ghost raised the Wuxia Rubik's Cube that was in his hand. The stream from the Rubik's Cube was still running. Han-san could see the video, which showed him caught in the screen of Shadow Ghost's camera. Han-sen's heart leaped at the sight, and so he quickly tried to fly out of the camera's frame. He kept an eye on the Rubik's Cube stream as he flew, but he soon realized that no matter what direction he flew, there would be no escape from that place. The video stream showed that he was always dead center of the camera's screen. It is useless. In my shadow area, you are just an image. And if I rip this image, your body will be torn just like it, Shadow Ghost boasted. Then he damaged a corner of the image that showed a bit of Hansen's hair. The moment the image of Hansen's hair was damaged, Hansen's actual hair was given a trim. He didn't know how it had happened, but there was nothing he could do to prevent it. The people that were watching the stream felt a chill. They knew Shadow Ghost could enter virtual images, but they didn't know he had a power like this. Everyone felt a chill. If Shadow Ghost trapped them in a picture, killing them would be as simple as damaging a camera. Some of the deified elites who were watching the video nodded in approval. They were impressed with Shadow Ghost's might. Don't worry, I'm not going to kill you. Another creepy smile crossed Shadow Ghost's face. You're worth more alive. I'm going to take you with me to the Extreme King. You might be my best chance of becoming deified. Han's son was looking at Shadow Ghost, who was outside the image, with an expressionless face. He said, Do you really think you can capture me this way? Shadow Ghost replied with confidence, saying, My area has no limiting range. Furthermore, you are just a king. Even if you were deified, you couldn't escape the boundaries of my area. Really? Han's son said. His left eye then flashed with a red light, and his body turned into a red shadow. Where is he? Shadow Ghost's face changed. Han's son had disappeared from the picture. Where is he? The people who were watching the stream were shocked too. They hadn't seen how Han's son had managed to get out of the picture's frame. Arg! Shadow Ghost's sudden scream drew everyone's attention back to him. One of Shadow Ghost's eyes was bleeding. It seemed as if some scary power had penetrated his eye and sent a jolt of pain straight to his brain. Han's son was standing behind Shadow Ghost. His Thunder God spike was dripping with blood. Next time you want to kill me, don't talk so much crap. Han's son swung the Thunder God spike, flicking away the blood. He took the Wuxia Rubik's Cube and flew away without looking back. Shadow Ghost's body fell through the emptiness of space. It appeared like he had been killed. Every noble watching the video stared in mute silence. Shadow Ghost was a nightmarish enemy, but he had been one-hit killed. The viewers were having difficulty wrapping their heads around the idea. Most of the kings, dukes, and nobles were unable to discern just how Han's son had managed to kill Shadow Ghost, though. That was what scared the audience the most. Someone who had just become a king had managed to kill a half-deified warrior as quickly as they might kill a chicken or a cow. It was hard to believe. The video stream suddenly went black. The spectacle was over. Many of the viewers were still reeling from the shock though. They hadn't yet figured out how to react. Han Sun turned off the Wuxia Rubik's Cube and flew forward. He wanted to take a look at the items Shadow Ghost and Bar had been carrying. But he didn't have time. A scary presence was coming this way. Han Sun could sense that if it wasn't a deified elite coming for him, then it was a very terrifying half-deified being. It was most likely someone that he couldn't compete with on his own. Of course, not long after Han Sun flew away, a shadow appeared where Han Sun had been. That person looked at the dead Shadow Ghost and the frozen Bar. He waved his hand, bringing out a sword light. He used it to break Han Sun's ice, freeing Bar and the others. Once Bar and Thunder were freed, they caught sight of the new man and began to tremble. Lando, Shadow from the Race of the Storm, screamed. He looked frightened. "Were you guys fighting Han Sun?" The person called Lando asked, his voice stern. "Yes," Shadow answered. He was very scared of Lando, but he still answered truthfully. After hearing Shadow's answer, Lando chased after Han Sun, his body moving so fast that the space around him seemed to groan. "I can't believe Lando is here. No matter how strong Han Sun is, that is one opponent that he won't be able to escape." Thunder finished his statement with a very long sigh. The traitor that the dragons hate the most. The inverse dragon Lando might not be deified, but he has killed enough of them. And they were deified dragons of all things. A guy like him can't be dealt with by a king. Shadow's mood had mellowed somewhat. There are many elites in this universe, and there are many half-deified elites. But the scariest half-deified in existence has to be Lando, Thunder said. After a moment of thought, he went on to say, although the half-deifieds of the Extreme King are powerful, this guy could fight an entire generation of them. If I had to pick an enemy, I would prefer to choose a half-deified of the Extreme King over Lando. Lando is just too evil. Even Bar looked shaken. He wasn't scared of anything, and he would go anywhere. But aside from deified elites, there were two people he feared. The inverse dragon Lando and Yushanshin of Sky Palace. If it was anyone else, he'd chase them down to the ends of the universe. Either that or he'd kill the person right where they were. But after seeing Lando, Bar had yet to say a single word. He just watched Lando go after Han Senator he didn't dare follow. Han Sun is dead, Bar said to himself. Then he flew out of the Tianxia system. He no longer planned to chase Han Senator. Han Sun flew through the clouds at full speed. He kept changing direction, and he erased his scent and trail as he fled. But still, he couldn't shake the entity chasing him from behind. Han Sun could also feel that whatever was pursuing him was gaining. The gap between them was closing. When Han Sun finally reached the edge of the purple clouds, he saw someone emerge from the clouds behind it. The being was coming his way, and it was coming fast. "One of the dragon?" Han Sun murmured. The man's dragon horns were particularly large, but he didn't have wings. He looked like a dragon hybrid. Han Sun was unable to shake the dragon's pursuit, so he stopped running. Lando came to a stop directly in front of Han Senator instead of striking. He just looked at Han Sun and asked, "You are the Han Sun that the Extreme King want? Would you believe me if I said no?" Han Sun smiled. Lando nodded. "Then come with me." "I could certainly come with you. But could you at least give me a reason that I should follow you?" Han Sun said without moving. Lando laughed. "I'm Lando. That should be reason enough." "You are Lando?" Han Sun was shocked to hear this name. Because the factions of the Geno universe were so competitive, many people had been bribed by their enemies to betray their race. Some would become proper traitors, whereas others would merely become spies who carried information. Lando was the most famous traitor in the past few decades. When others became traitors, they usually just sold classified information. But Lando had the gall to cut off the head of his master, who was a deified dragon. He gave it to the ruler of the destroyed, who used it as a chair. Inverse Dragon Lando's name was known across the universe. When dragon culture was discussed, his name always came up. His actions were a shameful stain on the honor of the dragons. The dragons had wanted to kill Lando for a long time, but Lando might have been the greatest half-deified to ever exist. And he always worked with extreme caution. The king of the destroyed protected him as well. So far, the dragons hadn't been able to touch him. Knowing this story, Hansen looked at Lando's back. The man had no draconic wings. Lando was a pure dragon. But when he killed his teacher, the dying man had managed to tear off his dragon wings. They had never grown back. "Will you come with me now?" Lando asked in a gravelly voice. "I'm not sure if I believe all the legends about you. But no matter who you are or how strong you are, I have to test your mettle for myself," Hansen said. "Right. If I was you, I wouldn't believe the stories about me either. It's a shame that the Extreme King want you alive. If they didn't, I wouldn't have to go through all this trouble," Lando said. And then he moved. He tried to grab Hansen by his head. Hansen didn't retreat. He sent his full power into Jadeskin. His body became like ice, and he threw his own palm against the hand that Lando had extended. The dragon's clutching fingers tore through the fabric of space, but Hansen and Lando's hands were both bounced backward. Jadeskin's ice power hadn't been able to seal Lando. All dragons had a high resistance to every element, and of course, Lando was no exception to this rule. The next second, their fists collided once more. The bodies of the two had become deadly weapons. Their fingers, palms, fists, arms, elbows, legs, and knees moved too fast to track. Neither of them would take a step back. Rather than releasing their power, the fighters exchanged blows of raw physical power. Even that was enough to strain and stretch the fabric of space. Catcha! The bones in Hansen's fingers were unable to withstand that next scary hit. They broke. Hansen's eyes widened. His jade skin made his body very strong. And although it was only at the first tier, his body was as sturdy as a half-deified's. Lando, however, had been able to break his fingers with a random punch. That was a disturbing amount of power. Lando's fists kept coming without reprieve. His eyes were perfectly calm as he unleashed his attacks, but his fists flew like a raging fire. Every punch took Hansen's full attention. Hansen's jadeskin let out a groaning sound. His arm bones cracked under the next hit, and still, Lando did not relent. The dragon wasn't attacking Hansen's weak spots though. He was making sure to only strike Hansen's arms and legs. "Is this guy going to break all my limbs to drag me back alive?" Hansen looked at Lando's face, and he became certain that he had guessed correctly. "Fuck you. You're so cruel." Hansen knew that his jade skin was too low level. If he had an 8th or 9th tier jade skin, he might have been able to fight against Lando. But right now he was too weak. If this continued, Lando would completely shatter his arms and legs. The bodies of the dragons are so scary, but their true talent lies in using evil breaker powers, right? Lando is so strong. Perhaps the tales are true. Hansen's chest was growing tight with tension. He used movement abilities to fight with Lando. Guys like Lando, who favored raw aggression and violence, usually didn't develop a very sophisticated movement set. Lando had a very powerful body and amazing strength, and he could usually beat his enemies outright. He wouldn't have to study his enemies before engaging them in combat. But when Hansen started to use his movement abilities, he noticed that they didn't benefit him much against Lando. It turned out that Lando could also move pretty well, and in that high-speed magical fight, Hansen didn't have a single advantage. He had to fight Lando on even footing. After a few more hits, his arms felt as if they were about to break. Pang! Lando's fists came down on Hansen's arms like hammers. His jade-covered arms had sustained too much damage, and cracks spread across them. When the final blow landed, they were completely broken. Lando's unstoppable fists flew forward to clobber Hansen's chest. Hansen's chest exploded like water, but the splashing water drew itself back together and reformed. His wounds recovered very quickly. The original Water King body wasn't as strong as Jade Skin, but its recovery speed was much better. It was quite useful after all. Lando didn't keep attacking. He looked at Hansen and said, "You either come with me now, or I turn you into a cripple. You live up to your reputation, Lando. But that doesn't mean I want to go home with you." Hansen blinked and said, "How about this? Your body is so strong, yes? If you can withstand 3 of my blows without falling, I will stop fighting and let you take me back. Even if people come to save me, I will not run." Sure. Lando agreed to the proposition without a second thought. You're a very determined man. Han Sun gave him a thumbs up. Go ahead then, Lando said coldly. My 3 hits require some time to prepare. But in the meantime, I can't deal with your constant attacks. We have a deal. If you fight me before I finish my 3 attacks, then you lose, Han Sun said. Strike, Lando said in an emotionless voice. His face was wholly unmoving. That means you are agreeing. Take my first hit then, Han Sun said. Then he gathered up power in his fist. Jadeskin was running at full power, and he used the yin-yang blast method to strike Lando's chest. Lando remained where he was. He didn't dodge, and he didn't run. He allowed Han Sun's punch to fall on his chest. The punch was silent, but Han Sun had woven his scary ice-sealing power with the yin force. It drilled right into Lando's chest to freeze his organs. 2 more hits, Lando said, plumes of icy air flowing over his lips. He behaved as if nothing had happened at all. This guy is really scary, but I have only unlocked the first tier of Jadeskin. If I was also half deified, he wouldn't be acting so cocky. Han Sun took 2 steps back and frowned. After pausing, Han Sun had an idea. He gathered up power in his fist once more. But this time, he didn't punch Lando once. He cast a continuous punch, but the power was unleashed at an extremely slow speed. It was as if it was crawling like a snail. All of a sudden, Han Sun cast countless punches. The power of each punch was like a wave, and as they swept forward, they gathered together to become a terrifying force. As Han Sun kept attacking, the waves built up. The scary powers were multiplied. It was like a tsunami was now headed for Lando. The sea of clouds all around was shoved out of the way by Han Sun's waves. They created a large vacuum zone. The scary power coming for Lando was like the wind blowing through the galaxy. Lando's muscles tightened up. The muscles in his body were moaning with the groans of the dragon. He didn't attempt to avoid it. He simply endured the power unleashed by Han Sun, power that had been multiplied several times. Pang! Han Sun's power came down on Lando's body, annihilating his armor. That multiplied force of the attack was mind-blowing. Lando's king-class armor was turned to dust, and the remaining fragments were scattered everywhere. They glittered around him like a cloud of tiny stars. But when the scary power came crashing against Lando's muscles, the blood vessels were highlighted so well that they looked like tattoos. The shockwave-like attack struck Lando's muscles, and the attack crumbled. Lando's body remained uninjured. What a powerful body. Han Sun looked at Lando in shock. Although Han Sun hadn't expected to defeat Lando with that hit, he expected it to send the man staggering back. He didn't even twitch though. That made Han Sun feel afraid. You only have 1 strike remaining. Lando's body was completely naked. His strong chest was emblazoned with the tattoo of a dragon. His face was impassive as he spoke. Han Sun went silent for a bit, and then he pulled out his Thunder God spike. In that case, it's time to bring out the big guns. I hope you don't blame me later for what's about to happen. The Thunder God spike wasn't a very destructive tool, but its paralytic power was difficult to withstand. Even a deified being would feel a blow from this weapon. No matter how strong Lando was, he couldn't be any stronger than a deified. Thinking of all this, Han Sun placed his power into the Thunder God spike. Power crackled across the Thunder God spike, bursting into waving colors like the northern lights. You really aren't going to dodge this thing? Han Sun asked, lifting the Thunder God spike and looking at Lando. Lando didn't respond, but there was an obvious, albeit unspoken desire for Han Sun to just hurry up and get on with things. Han Sun was fine with that. He lifted his Thunder God spike, aiming it to strike Lando in the head. He knew he would be unable to crack the man's head open, but the sheer amount of power that the spike could deliver should be enough to make Lando move. Pang! The lightning crackling all around the Thunder God spike connected with the side of Lando's head, and the streaks of silver power went straight into his skull. Lando's head jerked back. Han Sun was so happy about this, and he thought this was sure to be the one. But Lando only moved his head. His entire body didn't move. Silver light streaked over Lando's head, and white smoke streamed from his hair. But he didn't seem to react to the hit. He straightened his neck out, and while lightning still flashed across the Thunder God spike, it didn't seem to bother him. Han Sun was frozen. He couldn't summon words to speak. His body was strong too, but even he couldn't have endured the hit he had just dished out. Lando's complete lack of reaction was stunning. Lando used his fingers to touch the Thunder God's spike. He pushed it aside and said, "My body is already destroyed. There is no sensation within me. Pain, numbness, and dizziness don't exist in my body. The numbing effect brought on by lightning is ineffective against someone like me. All that did was give me a tiny buzz of electricity." "I see. No wonder the Thunder God's spike didn't work on you," Han Sen said with a wry smile. "Let's go." Lando turned around to leave. Han Sen hesitated a moment, but he did follow. He had no plans to escape. "You plan to keep your promise?" Lando looked at Han Sr. "Not really. But I knew trying to escape from you would be futile." Han Sen shrugged his shoulders. "You are an honest man," Lando said with surprise. Han Sen didn't say anything, but inside, he thought to himself, "I can't even tell which direction we are headed. I don't even know where Bauer is. Running around the Tianxia system won't solve anything. There must be many people like Lando after me. It's best to follow him now. If I run into any trouble up ahead, he will protect me. This isn't a bad idea for the time being." Han Sen followed Lando. Since the dragon noticed that Han Sen didn't seem likely to run off, he didn't tie Han Sen up. They flew through the clouds in a direction that Han Sen decided to call up. And after a while, they saw a group of people in front of them. "Lando!" The people screamed upon seeing Lando. And when they saw Han Sen, they were even more shocked. "Lando, why are you with Han Sen?" the king class leader asked Lando. Lando ignored him and kept flying. The king's face reddened with the snub, but he didn't complain to Lando. The people that were in Lando's way all backed off. They formed a path for him, with not one person trying to stand in his way. They knew better than that. But Han Sen wasn't so lucky. He tried to follow Lando, but the people circled around him, blocking his way forward. They clearly intended to take Han Sen down together. "Lando, why are you going so fast? Come and deal with these guys. They're starting to annoy me," Han Sen said with disdain. The people had been preparing to beat Han Sen up, but when they heard him say this, they seemed shocked. They glanced between Han Sen and Lando. Han Sen had just spoken, as if Lando was his subordinate. "Don't get in his way," Lando commanded without even turning his head. For the first time, Han Sen started to realize how much fear Lando inspired in the people of the Geno universe. The moment he spoke, all the others backed away from Han. Senator Han Sen just flew by 100 kings. They all just watched him go, not doing anything to him. "What should we do? Why is Han Sen with Lando?" one of the kings asked their leader with confusion. "Huh, no matter how strong Lando is he stronger than a true deified? With all the people that have come to the Tianxia system, there must be someone who is stronger than Lando. If we release this nugget of news, we might be able to take advantage of the ruckus." The leader laughed darkly. Han Sen followed Lando through the sea of clouds. They encountered many elites who had come in search of Han Sen, but whenever those elites saw Lando, they gave him a wide berth. No one would dare to go against Lando, especially face to face. But Han Sen could still feel the weight of many eyes resting on him. And that sensation gradually increased as time went by. Technological gadgets were of no use in the Tianxia system. But that didn't mean that the various bounty hunters had no way of tracking him. Many people with eyes and video powers, especially the kings with such talents, could watch Lando and Han Sen from tens of thousands of miles away. Lando simply flew forward, but he eventually came to a sudden stop. Han Sen could sense something odd ahead of them. As he looked forward, some shadows started to emerge from behind the green clouds. The figures all looked the same. Butterfly wings adorned with luscious patterns spread from their backs. Their bald heads each had 2 antennae dangling from them, and their bodies were clad in a black bug armor. There were 6 of these people. They flapped their wings and flew over to Lando. Han Sen observed the 6 of them, but he couldn't distinguish one from another. They all looked the same, and in their identical armor, they looked like sextuplets. Han Sen wasn't foolish enough to underestimate them based on their odd appearance, however. They were all 8th or 9th tier kings. Some of them might have even been half-deified. It was made obvious that they were uniquely powerful by the way they dared to stand in front of Lando. Ordinary kings wouldn't dare bar his path. "Lando, please do a favor for the 6 brothers. We would appreciate it," said the strange man leading them. "Who are you guys?" Lando asked lazily, not raising his eyes. "You." The strange man in front hissed in anger. Fine, Lando. We were going to show respect to the king of the destroyed. But if you really have a death wish, the butterfly fairy 6 kings can help you fulfill it." After that, the 6 strange people flapped their wings and flew toward Lando. "You find a safe place and sit tight. Wait for me there a little," Lando said calmly. Han's son heard the order, and so he flew far away from that portion of the sea of clouds. The butterfly fairy 6 kings watched Han's son leave, but they didn't give chase because Lando was watching them. So, they decided to surround Lando and deal with him. Before going after Han, Senator Han's son kept flying without looking back. The butterfly fairy 6 kings used an area, and the butterfly wings on their backs glowed with 6 different colors. When the 6 areas and 6 colors came together across them all, it became a 6-color area. It locked Lando within its radius. Pang! Lando punched the 6-color area, but his blow had no effect. Han's son was shocked as he glanced over his shoulder. All 6 of the butterfly fairies were half-deified. There was no longer any doubt about that. Now that the 6 of them had combined their areas into one, the potency of their individual areas must have multiplied by that number as well. If Lando's power wasn't enough to break that area, it was no wonder they had dared to threaten him to capture Han's son for themselves. From afar, Han's son heard one of the butterfly fairies say, "Lando, it doesn't matter how strong you are. You have fallen into our butterfly fairy 6 king 6 fairy area. It will stop you from moving in any direction." Lando ignored their words and just started throwing punches around himself. The 6 fairy area trembled a little, but it didn't buckle and break. Upon seeing the situation, Han's son turned and flew even faster. He was thinking to himself, "It looks like Lando might not be able to kill those guys for some time. This is the perfect chance for me to escape. Wait for you. I'm too smart to sit around and wait for you to recapture me." Ignoring the situation behind him, Han's son focused on trying to escape. He wanted to get as far away from Lando as possible. He had followed Lando for long enough to grasp where he was in the system. Although he could not determine exactly where Bauer was, he had a rough idea of which direction she had probably headed. Han's son didn't head straight in Bauer's direction though. He took the scenic route and went the long way around. He wanted to shake the beings that he knew were lurking in the clouds, watching his every move. But despite traveling so fast and so far, Han's son wasn't stopped by anyone. He switched directions a few times as he made his escape, but still, no one tried to stop him. Weird. Why is no one coming after me? Han's son wondered to himself. Then he finally figured it out. The people watching him were still scared of Lando. Because of that, they weren't going to capture Han's son until he had escaped far enough from Lando. Upon this realization, Han's son stopped trying to throw off his tails. Heading in a straight line, he sped up to leave Lando's region. Of course, when Han's son had gotten a fair distance from Lando, there were some creatures that just couldn't resist the temptation of jumping out to ambush him. There were a few dozen kings that hailed from several different races. They were a very disorganized and eclectic group. None of them thought that they could defeat Han's son individually, so they had formed a temporary alliance. Han's son looked at them, and he noticed they weren't the same kings he encountered earlier. The group of kings from earlier were just a few yahoos. They just had numbers, around 100, and nothing else. There were only 20 or 30 people in this group. 3 of them were half-deified, and it seemed as if they were the leaders of the temporary alliance. "Han's son, you should just surrender yourself. Don't make us hurt you." One of the half-deified leaders said to Han. Senator Han's son didn't say a word. Instead, he replied by sending a quick punch toward them. He was thinking to himself, "Who do you think you are? Fucking Lando? You're afraid you might hurt me? First, you need to have what it takes to hurt me." Seeing Han's son move, the half-deified suddenly shouted, "Boss, there you go." Han's son felt weird. He didn't know what the guy meant. He stopped moving and looked at another half-deified. This half-deified looked like a black tiger. He heard the call and roared, unleashing a black area. It looked to be attuned with the element of water. Han Sen wasn't afraid of a water element area, due to the fact he had the original Water King body. He could use the water to his advantage. The water wouldn't hurt him. Before Han Sen's punch reached the half-deified's face, the black area settled around him. The other 30 kings used their own areas as well. They had all kinds of areas, but when they overlapped the black tiger's area, the black area consumed them. The black area grew darker, and it suddenly made Han Sen feel as if he had fallen into an endless pit. He reached out with his hands, but he could no longer see his fingers. Not a water area? Han Sen was surprised. The dark area consumed the areas of the other kings, and then it became a giant black object that looked like an egg. When the black tiger gathered up its power, that black object shrank, growing smaller and smaller. The darkness within it became thicker and thicker, however. The darkness started to feel like a liquid as it pressed against Han Sen. His body could move through it. But when the darkness became deeper, something started to resist his motion. It was like he was inside cement that was becoming solid. Soon after, his body was stuck and he could no longer move. Under the black tiger's area power, a 3-meter-tall, egg-like object formed and trapped Han Sen. Han Sen tried to deploy his jade skin and break the black area. But he noticed that the darkness encasing him was as solid as it was terrifying. He couldn't move at all. What is this area? Han Sen felt strange, but he wasn't worried. The area seemed to consume the areas of others to empower its own. But it didn't actually deal any damage. All it seemed to do was trap him in the dark. If Han Sen really wanted to leave, he could use his super god spirit body to flee from the darkness. No matter how solid that darkness was, it couldn't bind him permanently. What's wrong, Han Sen? Not so cocky now. The kings all laughed loudly in unison. The dark area might have been solid, but it wasn't insulated against sound. Han Sen could hear what they were saying clearly. This area isn't bad. What is its name? Han Sen asked. The kings heard his question, and the half-deified that Han Sen conversed with earlier said, "This is Big Sky King's Black Big Sky King area. It has consumed 20 of our king area powers to trap you inside. And it doesn't just work on you either. Even if Lando was here, we'd have shut him in there with you." If that was true, why didn't you try to capture me when Lando was around? Han Sen asked with amusement. We didn't want to offend the ruler of the destroyed, the king answered. We don't need to talk to him. Let's take him to the extreme king so we can collect the bounty, another half-deified said, cutting off the conversation. Han Sen felt the darkness start to move. He knew that the kings were moving through the Tianxia system, pulling the dark area along with them. Han Sen tried to use the Dongxian area to get a better view of the dark area. He noticed that the substances composing the dark area were tightly woven, almost like a substance chain. This is a very powerful area. It is showing the signs of creating a substance chain. Maybe this black tiger is on the verge of becoming deified. Han Sen thought to himself. The black area absorbed the areas of others to become very hard. Han Sen used super spank, but he still couldn't break it. He decided to take a bit of a break. He was going to recover his energy before giving it another try. The kings were very excited. They pulled the egg-like area toward the edge of the Tianxia system. But not long after, Han Sen heard a scream from outside his prison. That scream was the half-deified who had conversed with Han Sen earlier. After that scream, Han Sen heard something that sounded like space ripping. And then everything grew quiet. Han Sen kept listening, but he couldn't hear any other sounds. Aside from that initial scream, there was no other sound to be heard. It was as if all the kings and half-deified people had suddenly run for the hills. Weird. Even if they saw an enemy, they should have said something. Why was there only one scream and then silence? Were they all killed before they could make a sound? Han Sen thought to himself. Catcha. As Han Sen was considering what might have happened, he suddenly heard a sound like rocks breaking. Then, a beam of light broke through the darkness that surrounded him. The giant egg cracked, and a webwork of light spread across its surface. It eventually shattered completely, freeing Han's senator. What Han Sen saw next shocked him though. Lando was hovering there, looking at him calmly. Han Sen coughed awkwardly into his hand. I was afraid you would be unable to beat the butterfly fairy 6 kings. So I may have run farther than I should have. I was caught by these people and brought to where you are now. Han Sen had wanted to be taken by those people, because he hoped they would take him farther away from Lando. But it seemed as if that plan hadn't worked out the way he'd hoped. Let's go. Lando said nothing more. He turned around and started to fly away. Han Sen fell into place behind Lando again. But as they flew, he thought to himself, how was he able to find me so quickly? Even if he was able to defeat the butterfly fairy 6 kings with ease, I intentionally took a route that would have been difficult to follow. And this Tianxia system is pretty much a maze. How was he able to tell where I was in such a short amount of time? Han Sen knew that he was missing something important. He immediately used the Dongxian aura to check his body. It wasn't long before he felt something out of place in one of his fingers. The skin on his fingers was fine, but on a bone in one of the fingers in his left hand, there was a tadpole-shaped mark. That mark was tiny, and it didn't even release any power. Han Sen hadn't even noticed its presence until that moment. If he hadn't grown suspicious and used the Dongxian aura to scan his body, he wouldn't have found that weird gray symbol on one of his bones. Han Sen remembered that Lando had struck and cracked a few of his fingers. The mark must have been placed during that strike. That's why he feels so safe without physically binding me. It's because he already has a tracker on me. Something about the idea of being tracked everywhere he went made Han Sen deeply uncomfortable. But that gray mark wouldn't stop Han Senator. It was easy to remove too. All he had to do was use his super god spirit body. But Han Sen didn't do anything about it just yet. He kept cool and pretended as if the mark had gone undiscovered. He continued to follow Lando. Lando, did you kill those butterfly fairy 6 kings? Han Sen asked, flying up next to Lando. Lando said quietly, I'm not a butcher. I don't kill when it isn't necessary. What about your master then? You must have had a reason to kill him, Han Sen inquired. Emotion flashed over Lando's face, but it soon returned to normal. With that same cold tone of voice, he said, that is none of your business. Say something that is my business then. Why are you taking me to the Extreme King? I didn't think someone like you would care about a reward, Han Sen said. There's a sword. Lando seemed like a nice person to chat with. He didn't sound like the teacher-slaying murderer the legends spoke of. Han Sen had imagined the man would be difficult to talk to, but that wasn't the case. What sword could be worth that much? If you want a weapon, I can give you a deified weapon. You'll find me easier to trade with than the Extreme King. Han Sen wanted to learn more. I only want that sword, Lando said as he moved forward. He didn't turn to look at Han Sr. A sword that you have to trade a life for must be very special. Why don't you tell me what is so special about this sword? Han Sen said with curiosity. Lando didn't respond. It was obvious he had no intention of telling Han Sen anything else about this sword that he wanted so badly. Han Sen started to say something else, but he suddenly heard the sound of something stampeding toward them through the clouds. It sounded like 1,000 horses running all at once. He raised his head and saw a group of unicorns burst through the clouds. They looked like an endless sea of white. All emotion left Lando's face. He spoke to Han Sen saying, protect yourself. Now Han Sen knew another reason that Lando hadn't tied him up. Lando knew that the way back to the Extreme King wouldn't be safe. If he had to hold on to Han Sen in a fight, it would be too much trouble. Letting Han Sen run off on his own would allow Lando to focus his attention on whoever was attacking them. You're very calculating, but you've underestimated me. I am Han Sen. You think a mere tracking mark can beat me? Han Sen laughed sinisterly, but he didn't stick around to gloat. He ran off in the opposite direction. It wasn't long into his escape attempt that he saw a group of gold unicorns coming at him from another cloud. They were everywhere, and there were as many of these gold ones as there were white unicorns the other way. Oh shit! Why are there so many xenogeniacs? Han Sen drew his knife and ran straight into the unicorn herd. The sword lights flashed. Blood was everywhere. He immediately killed a few unicorns. Xenogenic du Kuntit. Xenogenic gene found. They really are xenogenics. Han Sen kept pushing through the enormous herd of unicorns, massacring them as he went. His ghost teeth knife cut them down like a scythe through a wheat field. But he wasn't harvesting wheat. He was harvesting lives. The unicorns didn't relent. Han Sen kept slicing and dicing, and blood splashed all around him. He killed countless unicorns in no time at all. Han Sen suddenly heard a long scream. A glowing unicorn stepped through the herd. It was twice as large as the ordinary gold unicorns, and its horn was pure gold as well. It was thundering toward Han Sen, and its body seemed to strain the space around it as it ran. Han Sen slashed at the unicorn's horn. The blade and the horn collided with a metallic shriek. Han Sen bounced away a few hundred meters before coming to a stop. Before Han Sen restabilized, he saw another unicorn coming for him. This next one was black, and it radiated a terrifying amount of power. It was no weaker than the enormous gold unicorn. Han Sen sent a punch toward the black unicorn. The ice light landed on the black unicorn, but the creature shone with a black light. It was as if a shield manifested, blooming from the tip of the creature's horn. It was shaped like a spindle. The ice light, when it touched down on the shield, was ricocheted away. It had been completely unable to pierce the fusiform area the creature had created. Pang! The black unicorn smashed into Han Sen's body, breaking him in two. He turned into dust, but then his real body reappeared on the other side of the field of battle. As he turned, he saw another large unicorn coming for him. This one was a stark white. Oh shit! Why are the white unicorns coming for me as well? Isn't Lando over there? He began to wonder if Lando had played a trick on him. But when he looked closer, he saw Lando engaged in combat with a rainbow-colored unicorn. The rainbow-colored unicorn was emitting a rainbow-colored god light. But as he watched the light shimmer and warp reality around it, he knew that it was a deified unicorn. How unlucky am I to encounter this deified xenogenic? Han Sen felt depressed. Even Lando wouldn't be able to handle a deified xenogenic. It seemed as if the situation was going from bad to worse. Since the rest of the unicorns couldn't get anywhere close to the fight between Lando and the deified unicorn, they came for Han Sen instead. Han Sen had already encountered 4 half-deified unicorns, and now there was an entire ocean of lesser unicorns coming after him. If Han Sen stayed to fight, he'd wear his hand down to nubs even if the unicorns lined up, so he could kill them one by one. When a red unicorn also began running toward him, Han Sen had an idea. His left eye flashed with red. He turned into a bloody shadow and hopped into the red unicorn's eyes. Losing their target in the blink of an eye left all the unicorns shocked and confused. They looked around, trying to find Han Sen, but none of them could figure out where he had gone. Han Sen didn't stop in the eye of the red unicorn though. He immediately teleported into the eye of another unicorn. He kept bouncing through the herd of unicorns, never staying in any particular host for more than a second. Although 4 of the unicorns were half-deified, Han Sen wasn't really scared of them. What unsettled him was the strange timing of the unicorn's arrival. Han Sen felt like there were larger forces at work here, forces that he hadn't yet identified. He kept moving through the unicorn herd, flickering between the eyes of the beasts. By doing this, he was able to inch his way to the edge of the battleground. He kept watch over the unicorns as he moved, trying to discern what had inspired their sudden attack, but he still hadn't noticed anything out of place. Did I overthink this? I guess their attack was a good thing, all in all. At least this way, I can escape Lando. He's still trying to fight that deified unicorn and all the rest. I don't think he'll make it. Even if he does make it out, he won't be able to catch me again, Han Sen thought. By this time, he had made it to the edge of the unicorn horde. He came out of the eye of the furthest one and tried to fly away unnoticed. Pang! Han Sen felt as if he had run face first into a steel board. He reeled back, his nose weeping blood. What is this? Han Sen looked forward but he couldn't see anything. He reached out his hand to touch whatever he had crashed into, and he realized it was some sort of invisible shield. There's something wrong here. Han Sen touched the invisible shield. His body flew up a few hundred miles, but his hands kept in contact with the shield. There was no end to it. Han Sen traveled another 1,000 miles, but there was no sign that the invisible shield would end anytime soon. He had no idea how far it went. What is this? Who is doing this? Han Sen was shocked. If that shield covered the entire battleground, then that meant there had to be an additional deified being who was pulling strings in this battle. Only someone of that level could create a shield so strong and large. Han Sen opened his Dongxian aura and used the purple butterfly in his right eye to see if he could discern more about the invisible shield. He immediately saw that the thing prohibiting his passage was an invisible substance chain wall. He looked ahead and saw that the wall surrounded the entire area. There was no end to it. There really is a deified elite behind all this. Han Sen took a deep breath. He didn't understand why the deified elite hadn't revealed itself and fought. He only knew that the deified had locked down the battleground, and now, Han Sen couldn't escape. Suddenly, Han Sen's left finger grew hot. A beam of gray light emerged from his finger, glowing from the symbol painted onto one of his metacarpals. The mark seemed to fade away from his finger, and the gray light formed the image of Lando in front of him. Stop running. This place has been locked down by a deified elite. We need to kill every xenogeneic here. Otherwise we die, said the mark that had turned into the shadow of Lando. Why? Han Sen frowned. There is no why. We simply aren't strong enough to have any other options. I may not like this, but someone is using us as chess pieces right now. Lando's shadow slowly disappeared. It seemed as if the power was extinguished. Lando had placed the mark on Han Sen to keep him on a leash, but now he had simply torn the mark off. That told Han Sen how serious of a situation they were in. Lando wasn't bluffing. Han Sen had only been hovering there for a short time when the horde of unicorns found him again. They rushed toward him in a crazed mass. Han Sen didn't use his Blood Eye Evil God power this time. Instead, he drew his Ghost Teeth Knife and Thunder God Spike. With them in hand, he plunged into the field of battle. In a few seconds, he slew a dozen unicorns. Xenogeneic Duke hunted, White Unicorn. Xenogeneic gene found. Obtained White Unicorn Beast Soul. After killing a few more unicorns, Han Sen received this Beast Soul announcement. Han Sen took a quick glance into his Sea of Soul and noticed that it was a Mount Beast Soul. He could use it to travel, but it wouldn't fight. In this situation, using a mount would be pointless. There were too many other unicorns about. Maneuverability was incredibly important right now, and using a mount would be too cumbersome. The unicorns came in 7 different colors. The colors he had seen thus far included black, white, purple, red, gold, blue, and green. The unicorns of each color were divided into ordinary dukes, kings, and half-deifieds. Each color possessed different area powers. Just like the Demon Bug King by Sima that Han Sen used to use, the unicorn's powers could be overlapped and increased. But while Han Sen's old shield was a purely defensive by Sima, and the areas of the unicorns could also be used to attack, Han Sen had to deal with the group of unicorns and fight 7 unicorn kings at the same time. It was a very chaotic fight. There were simply too many unicorns. Although Han Sen was able to avoid engaging directly with the unicorn kings, he had his hands full just killing the lesser unicorns. The blood that flowed in his wake was like a river. Han Sen's hands soon grew tired. Fuck! What is going on? Han Sen looked over to Lando, who was still fighting that deified unicorn. Han Sen was so far away that he couldn't see their battle clearly though. All he could see was the shifting light of 7 colors. He knew the deified unicorn had the upper hand. Lando was having a hard time dealing with the creature's attacks. I hope the legends about him are true, and he can actually take down a deified xenogeneic. If those tales aren't true, I don't think he will last very long. Han Sen gritted his teeth. While Han Sen and Lando fought, a giant turtle hovered above the clouds. That giant turtle was carrying a pavilion upon its back. A dragon man and a deified of the destroyed were drinking tea together. Behind the dragon man was a female dragon servant, holding a Wanjia Rubik's Cube. It was filming Han Sen and Lando's battle. Every person in the Geno universe was watching the tremendous fight unfold. Close, it doesn't look like you are going to win. The dragon man sipped tea and smiled at the destroyed. Winning or losing, it's all the same to me. If I lose, You can have Lando and Han Senator, I won't get in the way of that. But if you lose, you won't betray our terms, will you, Dragon One? Close's 6 eyes looked at the Dragon Man while he spoke. We dragon always keep our promises. If Lando and Han's son can kill all of these unicorns and survive, the dragon will leave the Tianxia system and cease all involvement in this matter, Dragon One said firmly. Although the Dragon Man was being referred to as Dragon One, he wasn't the same Dragon One that Han's son had seen before. This was the Dragon One of a previous generation. In that case, let's wait for the result. Close grabbed his cup of tea and had a sip. He looked rather relaxed. Dragon One could see that Close didn't appear worried. He smiled and asked, "You aren't afraid of Lando being killed by that deified unicorn? If that happens, what will you tell the king of the destroyed? He is just a servant. If he joins the extreme king, he knows he might sacrifice his ties to the destroyed," Close said slowly. His face didn't move a muscle. After that, Close's expression became interested. He looked at Dragon One and said, "I'm afraid this is the dragon's best chance at capturing Lando. If you fail, how will you explain that to the king of the dragons? Lando has to die. You really think he can defeat a deified being all alone?" Dragon One shot back, his tone dripping with derision. "Han's son is still there." Close laughed. "He's just a first-tier king. It doesn't matter how experienced he might be. He's no more than a strong ant," Dragon One growled. Close didn't say anything more. He looked at the dragon servant holding the Wuxia Rubik's Cube and said, "I can't believe that someone as strong and smart as you has decided to use the live stream of the Thousand Treasures Alliance to his advantage. No matter the resource, I can find ways to make use of it," Dragon One said with a chilly smile. All the creatures in the Geno universe were watching this stream if they had the time. But the video that Dragon One was streaming wasn't as polished as the previous videos that had come from the Treasure Identifier Elder. He didn't have a professional team to handle the video, so he just played it straight to the broadcasting networks, 1:1 as things happened. There was no editing or cleanup. So, many creatures were unable to see that Lando was actually fighting a deified unicorn. They could only see a video of flashing lights. It was like the lights you'd see at the end of the world. In Hansen's fight, high-level kings and dukes were able to make out a bit more. So, most of the kings, dukes, and nobles tuned into Hansen's battle. Some powerful elites focused on Lando and his fight against the deified unicorn. They knew that Lando's performance would determine whether both he and Han's son lived or died. But they also wanted to know more about just how strong Lando truly was. Although Lando had once killed a deified elite, most elites believed there had to be more to the tale. After all, Lando's teacher wasn't just an ordinary deified. And the way that Lando slew his teacher indicated that they were missing information. This is too scary. That Han's son is surrounded by kings and half-deifieds. And yet he hasn't lost his advantage. He has killed so many unicorns. He's even managed to bring down 2 king unicorns. What impressive power. It's a shame, really. If he hadn't been reckless enough to kill an extreme king prince, he could have become famous across the entire universe. I think that Isha has the most cause to be upset about what has happened. Hansen's genes aren't stable, and yet she actually brought him all the way up to king class. I can't imagine how many resources and how much effort was spent on him to get that done. But now it's all gone. We don't even know if what Han's son has done will affect her. Isha is smart. When Han's son received Kong Fei's deified feather, many normal elites wanted to adopt him. But Isha was the one that took him in and brought him up to king class. No one expected Han's son to become this strong when he reached king. I bet those other elites really regret it now. What would they be regretting? No matter how strong he is, he's just a king. Not even a deified could get out of a predicament like this, let alone a king. Killing. Crazy killing. Hansen didn't know how many unicorns he had killed so far, but after dealing out so much death, it seemed that a hazy red film had formed over his vision. Kacha, the head of a king-class black unicorn, was hewn open by Han's senator as blood poured out of the severed head. Han's son rammed a hand into it and pulled out a crystal. He put it in his mouth. It was the king-class unicorn's xenogenic gene. Han Sun immediately swallowed and refined it. The gene filled up his king-class genes and restored his energy. After having to kill so many enemies, he had lost a lot of his strength. He couldn't use his Dongxian armor to recover his power quickly, so he absorbed power from space itself. But even then, it wasn't enough to sustain him in a fight like this. Instead, Han Sun used Consume to quickly refine the king-class gene. The power kept Han Sun in the game. He would have collapsed by now if he hadn't done this. The whole cloudscape of the Tianxia system had been painted in blood. The unicorns had no fear of death, and that was especially true of the 7 unicorn kings. All of them wielded godlights, and the rainbow area they produced was causing Han Sun a lot of trouble. Because Han Sun had the blood-eye evil god beast soul, he could transport himself into the eyes of one of the unicorns if he found himself in danger. If he hadn't done that every now and again, he would have already been skewered by the 7 unicorn kings. Han Sun had tried jumping into the eyes of the 7 unicorn kings. He wanted to attack them from inside their eyes, to see if he could kill them from within. But the eyes of the 7 unicorn kings were special. The eyes of each unicorn king were a different color, and it was impossible to see their pupils, irises, or even the whites of their eyes. Something about their multicolored eyes kept them from reflecting Han Sun's image, so he couldn't use his blood-eye evil god beast soul on them. 7 half-deifieds were now attacking him. An ordinary king would have long since been killed by their rainbow-colored power. Han Sun depended on the blood-eye evil god beast soul, and that was how he was able to last so long without being hurt. After Han Sun consumed another king-class gene, he suddenly had a weird announcement play in his head. King-class genes have reached 100. Battle body area is ready for evolution. Han Sun grinned. He had absorbed many king-class genes before, and after absorbing those last few, his collected sum had now reached 100. It was just as he had expected, too. 100 king-class genes could increase the tier of his area by 1. Without any hesitation, Han Sun chose to level up his jade skin area. He couldn't use his Dongxian area unless he was using Dollar's identity, so jade skin had become his primary power. Han Sun used the genes to level up his jade skin area, and when he did, a cool feeling flowed through his flesh and bones. It was like his body was a dried-up riverbed, and water was suddenly flowing through it once more. After the modification of his genes, his cells started to change, making Han Sun's body glow. He looked perfect like some newborn deity. The fight had exhausted Han Sun, but now, he was in his best shape. No, he was doing better than he was in his best shape. Pang! An icy light-covered ghost teeth knife. It came down on the head of one king unicorn, and it cut the 3rd-tier king and its area in half. Han Sun began murdering everything around him. It was like he was in a herd of sheep. When his knife light flashed, many unicorns died in an instant. He increased his area level during a fight. All of the race elites were frozen. If a fighter increased their king area, their personal strength actually decreased briefly during the process. Leveling up an area modified one's genes to spark an evolution of one's cells. The body was slightly weakened while this change was underway, and although it was nothing life-threatening, it was best to choose a safe and secure location while undergoing such a process. Accidents were best avoided. The idea of fighting while leveling up an area at the same time was simply ridiculous. The evolution of Han Sun's area had happened too fast. Most of the changes happened within seconds. Evolving at that rate wasn't rare in the Geno universe, but it usually only happened with primitive creatures. The genes of a primitive creature had unknown possibilities, and under the influence of an exterior force, they could evolve quickly. The higher the level of the creature was, the more solid their genes were. It became harder to evolve, so the speed of every evolution was slower. Han Sun was already king class, and he moved up an entire tier in just a second. To the elites who were watching the video stream, it seemed unbelievable. Maybe it's because his genes aren't stable. There are way too many possibilities, and that is why he evolved so fast, many of the king class people thought. Regardless, they couldn't avert their gazes from Han Senator Jadeskin had achieved its 2nd-tier area. Han Sen's body's power and speed were increased, but it still wouldn't be enough for him to beat that 7-colored unicorn. Pang! Han Sun was fighting like mad. A crack appeared in the sky, and it was coming his way. Pang! A huge number of unicorn bodies were suddenly torn apart by that crack in the fabric of space. Han's son avoided its power, but then someone fell from that rent in space. Lando! Han's son was shocked. Lando had apparently created the crack. Lando's dragon tattoo was flashing. There was a bloody hole in it, and the hole went all the way through Lando, revealing the clouds that floated behind him. Seeing Lando like this, Han's son realized that things were going very badly. Lando couldn't keep fighting that deified unicorn, and now there was a gaping hole in his body. If Lando was killed, then the deified unicorn's next target would be Han's senator. How could he not be scared? Lando, are you okay? Han's son shouted at Lando, but he didn't dare go closer to the man. The deified rainbow unicorn was coming. It looked as if it had just teleported through the fabric of the universe to land on Lando. The dragon tattoo on Lando's body flashed. His hair was a bloody mess. His body suddenly jerked to the side and dodged the rainbow laser attack of the deified unicorn. But his chest was still bleeding from the hole. It wasn't healing. Lando looked calm and composed, but Han's son could tell that his power was waning. It was still impressive that a half-deified had done battle with a deified creature for so long though. But if he died, Han's son would be left to face the deified unicorn alone. That would be extremely dangerous. Try to live. Use everything you have to live. Lando was floating in the air. His eyes didn't look frightened, and he didn't look at the bloody hole in his chest. He just went on pretending it didn't exist. Han's son then remembered Lando mentioning that his body had been destroyed, and he could no longer feel pain. The dragon's groan rolled across the sky, and blood showered down like rain. Lando was fighting the deified unicorn once more, but all Han's son could see was the countless droplets of blood in the sky. They landed on the clouds and soaked into them. It was obviously Lando's dragon blood. This is pretty bad. We have to find a way to escape this place. Han's son had tried to get out many times, but his power wasn't enough to break the substance chains that formed their invisible prison. He would have to use his super god spirit body. Otherwise, he had no chance of escaping. Why are there no other xenogenics or races watching us? If anyone was beyond this invisible shield, I could use my eyes to just teleport outside. Han's son was depressed. He kept looking around, but he couldn't see a single creature. Han's son guessed that someone had locked the place down on purpose. Otherwise, something would surely have come to watch the fight. What kind of people want us dead so badly? Han's son shouted, turning his face up to the sky. He hoped to get some useful information from Lando. No one wants you dead. We are just fighting bulls in an arena. Lando's voice echoed back. He was shockingly calm. It was as if, in addition to being unable to feel pain, he could no longer muster emotions. Han's son understood what Lando meant immediately. They had become contestants in a sport. They weren't matadors trying to baiting bulls while onlookers cheered. They were dogs fighting in a ring. The reason that the scary deifieds hadn't personally killed them was simple. The deifieds were enjoying the fight itself. Whether Han's son and Lando lived or died, someone would still be entertained. Their desperation to survive kept them fighting. But after realizing what was going on, Han's son wasn't optimistic about his odds of surviving this. He wasn't optimistic at all. No one wanted to be a dog that stubbornly continued to fight a losing battle. But he had no choice. He was like a puppet on strings. That powerless feeling made Han's son's chest made it feel like he was being crushed. Pang! In the clouds, another crack had been torn in space. Lando had just been sent flying. His body was covered in blood, and there were wounds all over him. But even so, he was still fighting. It didn't look as if he was going to give up. Lando's eyes were clear and focused. Han's son could practically feel his desire. It was like he was saying, "You don't like this? Then use your power to defeat them." Boom! Lando had blood all over him, but he still gathered himself and charged back toward the deified unicorn. It looked as if he was going to fight until the last drop of blood was depleted. Lando would never give up. Lando's emotions were mirrored in Han's son's heart as well. This powerless feeling made him recall everything he had been through in his life. He had so many questions. His brain was full of things he needed to have explained, but no one else could. He was looking for answers all alone. Han Sen knew no one was going to give him answers, and that was because he was too weak. Like his father Han Yufei, he had chosen to suffer everything alone, to keep his wife and children protected, and he hadn't divulged his past to anyone, not even Han Senator, and that was because Han Sun was a kid with no power. Telling Han Sun would have been useless. It would only put a greater weight upon his shoulders. A father didn't want his kids to suffer, or bear a weight they were never supposed to endure. People other than Han Sen's father had different motives for withholding information. Rather than trying to protect Han Sun, they simply thought he was weak. What was the point in giving secrets to someone who was weak? It wouldn't help them at all, and it might only lead to trouble. But Han Sun had to explore these questions because when it was dark and quiet, they ran endlessly through his mind, looping over and over again. You might hate the feeling of being powerless, but there was nothing he could do about it. Weak, not respected, without the authority to choose his destiny. That was all because he wasn't strong enough. The feelings on Lando's face were also deep inside Han Sen's heart. This was why Han Sun wanted so desperately to be strong. He craved those answers. This debt. I want those fuckers to pay me back. Han Sun gnashed his teeth as the blood inside his body boiled. The killing continued, and the 7 unicorn kings couldn't suppress Han Sun any longer. He killed countless unicorns, and they screamed at Han Sun in rage. They must have really hated him. Suddenly, Han Sun saw rainbow lights pouring down from the sky. Many of the unicorn kings tried to use their areas to shield themselves from the light. The unicorns left exposed to the light suddenly caught on fire. The light even reached those 7 unicorn kings, and they burned under the radiance. Their bodies started to fade. Oh no, Han Sun thought. He saw the black unicorn scream to the sky. A vacillating area of darkness had formed outside the creature's body. Suddenly, it was coming for Han Senator. It now moved so much faster than it had before. So much faster than Han Sun was capable of moving. Han Sun wanted to use his blood-eye evil god beast soul, but it was too late. He lifted his ghost teeth knife and thunder god spike. He positioned them in front of his chest to block the incoming strike of the black unicorn. Pang! Han Sen's body shot away like an iron ball being fired from a cannon. Blood filled his mouth, and he heaved it out in a long spray. His chest felt as if it had exploded. When the deified unicorn's power had buffed the unicorn kings, the black unicorn's speed and power had increased. Han Sen's second-tier jade skin wasn't enough to fight it. Before Han Sen's body came to a stop, 2 white lights blazed from the white unicorn king's eyes. They broke Han Sen's body. Han Sen's body exploded like water, but he quickly recoalesced. Han Sen's body regained its familiar features once again, but Han Sen's face looked very pale. He had his original Water King body to save his life, but he was still injured. Now that the unicorn kings had been buffed up by the deified unicorn, Han Sun was no longer a match for them. The deified unicorn's buff is so scary. If he did that to me, how powerful might I become? Han Sen's face cycled through expressions. Now the purple and gold unicorn kings were coming Han Sen's way. Their scary area powers created fusiform shields. The different colored shields had different powers. The next second, the purple and gold unicorn kings hit Han Sun, crushing his body. The moon doppelganger exploded. Han Sen's true self appeared on the other side. Without hesitating, Han Sun turned into a blood shadow and fired himself into the eyes of a Duke-class unicorn. Pang! Han Sun had only just entered the eyes of that Duke-class unicorn when a red light fell on the unicorn, bursting the creature's head into bloody chunks. Han Sun didn't stop. He teleported into another Duke unicorn's eye. Pang! The result was exactly the same. That Duke-class unicorn's skull was broken again, but this time, it was via a black light. Han Sun kept trying to move around with his eye powers, but he was discovered every time. Without an ounce of hesitation, the unicorn kings merrily killed the unicorns Han Sun fled into. 7 unicorn kings whinnied into the sky, and many of the other unicorns turned around to run away. Clearly, they understood Han Sen's eye skill, and they weren't going to give him a chance to use it anymore. Seeing all this, many dukes and nobles sighed. It is game over for Han Sun and Lando. Ordinary people often sympathized with an underdog. Han Sun and Lando were the best of their level, but now people were sympathizing with them. Lando was already injured, so it didn't look as if he would last much longer. Han Sun's ice skills had been his best chance of survival at this point. If he couldn't use those ice skills, his end wouldn't be any prettier than Lando's. Close, the table is set. Your expectations of that traitor were too high, it appears. Dragon 1 sipped tea from his teacup and smiled coldly. It isn't the end just yet. It's still difficult to determine who the winner will be. Close continued to smile. What? Does that traitor still have a few tricks up his sleeve? Dragon 1 frowned as he looked at Lando, who was still in battle. Who knows? It's difficult to say, isn't it? Close said in a mysterious tone of voice. Pang! Another big explosion rocked the battle. Lando was sent flying away again. By this point his injuries were very dire. There were 3 bloody holes in his chest, plus countless wounds and scrapes across his body. He was bleeding all over, and his body was beginning to run out of blood to spill. His injuries were so serious that any other half-deified would be immobilized by the pain. In their agony, they'd literally scream themselves to death. But Lando still moved, as if he didn't have any pain. He just looked a bit pale. The rainbow unicorn was coming for him again. Its eyes were like pieces of glass that reflected the entire universe. The rainbow light was headed for Lando again. In its eyes, it looked as if it held the very essence of life and death. Lando's body danced in the sky, but he no longer had the strength to dodge the attacks that came his way. The scary rainbow light was going to perforate his head. Everyone thought this was the moment Lando would be killed. No matter how strong the body of a dragon might be, it couldn't be revived if the head was annihilated. Only a very few of the dragon could ever be fully reborn. Lando suddenly groaned like a dragon, but when Han Sun looked at him a little closer, he could see that the groan didn't actually come from Lando's mouth. It came from his back. The purple draconic tattoo on Lando's back had started moving. It grew, spreading to cover his entire back. It glowed with a purple light. Purple air hissed out of the dragon tattoo, making it appear as if the dragon tattoo was a living entity. Lando was in the air. He threw his fist in a punch toward the rainbow light. The purple dragon tattoo shone on his back, and the purple air wrapped around his arm in a shroud. It was like the spine of a dragon was wrapped around that launched fist. A purple dragon came out of the fist and hit the unicorn's rainbow light. The two powers hit each other inside the clouds, and suddenly, a hole was torn right through space. A giant black hole appeared there and started sucking everything inside. But there was no explosion. Huh. Isn't that the Demon Hell Dragon tattoo from Dragon 2? Why would it be on the traitor? Dragon 1 stared at the purple tattoo on Lando's back. The Demon Hell Dragon tattoo has very special powers. The legends say it comes from Dragon 2 of the prior generation. The same Dragon 2 who was Lando's master. Dragon 2 created it in the hope of challenging Dragon 1. It was a shame he was beheaded by his student before he could use it, Close said with a smile. It looks like the Demon Hell Dragon tattoo wasn't destroyed. That traitor took it for himself. Very good, very good. Instead of being shocked, Dragon 1 was actually happy. He looked at the Demon Hell Dragon tattoo with excitement. The last generation's Dragon 2 wanted to obtain Dragon 1's seat. He used his deified body as a base, and refined his blood into a tattoo that became known as the Demon Hell Dragon tattoo. It was quite the treasure. Not many dragons knew about that treasure, and no second dragon wanted to try it because it was too painful. Using his own body and his dragon blood to create the Demon Hell Dragon tattoo meant that Dragon 2 put himself into a smithy's furnace to be forged. That pain wasn't something that just anyone could endure. It was like taking a trip to hell, where you would have to endure endless torture. That was why it was called Demon Hell Dragon tattoo. Dragon 2 of the prior generation suffered for 10,000 years to create this treasure that was called the Demon Hell Dragon tattoo. He had planned to use it to rise within the dragon ranks. When that Dragon 2 died, the other dragons thought the Demon Hell Dragon tattoo was destroyed. After all, The demon hell dragon tattoo was created by Dragon 2. It was a part of his body, but no one thought the demon hell dragon tattoo had actually ended up on Lando's body. Not only that, but he could apparently control it. Seeing the power of the demon hell dragon tattoo, it was obviously something that had reached deified status. It could create substance chains. Lando himself hadn't yet become deified, but already he could make the demon hell dragon tattoo manifest in an incredibly powerful way. If he became deified and was able to use the full power of the demon hell dragon tattoo, the power he could unleash would be even scarier. You knew Lando had the demon hell dragon tattoo? Dragon 1 asked, looking at Close. How was Lando able to kill his teacher if he had the demon hell dragon tattoo? Are you so naive that you think a half-deified can easily slay a deified? Close asked, his voice grating. Dragon 1 wasn't angry. He laughed and said, Good. Today I will claim the demon hell dragon tattoo too. Then the grudge will be over. What? Despite being a dragon, you have no confidence in what the demon hell dragon tattoo can achieve? Close licked his lips as he spoke. That tattoo is strong, but Uncle Dragon 2 had only created the prototype. It isn't entirely finished. And you're underestimating the power of the Tianxia unicorns. They aren't just ordinary deified creatures, Dragon 1 said with certainty. Worry suddenly passed over Close's face. He looked at the deified unicorn and Lando. Han's son was getting chased by the unicorn kings. The herd of unicorns was fleeing as fast as they could, so he couldn't use his eye ability to escape. He frowned. The gold unicorn king pursued Han's son relentlessly. The beast clearly wanted to end him. You won't treat me with any respect unless I show my teeth, huh? Hansen thought angrily. He gathered up all the power he had. Then he lifted the thunder god spike and thrust it toward the gold unicorn's fusiform area. Dong! The area and the thunder god spike clashed against each other, unleashing a scary fountain of sparks. The impact ripped the fabric of space. Hansen felt as if his arms were about to be shaken loose, and his entire body was pushed back by the force of that fearsome power. Hansen held tightly to the thunder god spike. His jade skin power was running at max capacity, but it still wasn't enough to repel the gold unicorn's power. Hansen used all the might he could muster, and it felt like he was pulling power all the way from his toenails. The blood pulse sutra was boiling inside Hansen's body, and his blood roared through his veins like a runaway train. Boom! Suddenly, a force shook Hansen from the inside out. He could sense an invisible cogwheel in front of him. His body was the center of the cogwheel, the big red cogwheel. The blood pulse sutra is going to become king class. Hansen was shocked. He hadn't expected the Blood Pulse Sutra to level up without an enormous amount of conscious effort on Hansen's part. The Blood Pulse Sutra's self-cogwheel started to spin. It did so in unison with other cogwheels of the universe. Because Hansen's body was in motion, he couldn't open the Universal Core Hall's door. But after the Blood Pulse Sutra's self-cogwheel moved, Hansen noticed something strange. The other self-cogwheels that Hansen had spun could push the universal cogwheels around them. Jadeskin's cogwheel could push 7, and the Dongxian Sutra's cogwheel could push many. The Blood Pulse Sutra, though, couldn't push any of the nearby universal cogwheels. Somehow, though, Hansen still sensed that many universal cogwheels were connected to it. Hansen didn't understand what was going on, and he had no idea what the area power of the Blood Pulse Sutra might be. When he activated his mutant blood area, no actual area powers were emitted. And yet his fitness increased a lot. Fighting the Unicorn Kings wasn't all that difficult for him now, and he was now moving quickly enough to evade their attacks. Pang! Hansen spun the Thunder God Spike in his hand and jabbed it into the gold unicorn's area. Then Hansen leaped up, dodging another unicorn's laser light. Lando's Demon Hell Dragon tattoo was getting brighter. The scary purple dragon air rising from the tattoo was condensing into substance chains. It became a giant purple dragon upon Lando's body. The Tianxia unicorn's face looked grim. The rainbow colors in its eyes flashed repeatedly, as if the universe was dying and being reborn inside them. Lando roared, and a giant purple dragon shook everything around them. It looked as if he was going to swallow the entire world. The light in the Tianxia unicorn's eyes deepened, combining until all the colors had mixed into a uniform gray. The gray light shot out, heading for the raging purple dragon. When the gray light and giant purple dragon collided, the whole world seemed to go quiet. The powers collided in near silence, and for a moment, nothing seemed to happen. A small vortex appeared between them, then began to expand, growing until it was exerting a powerful drag on everything in sight. It was like space itself was falling into an abyss. Han Sen and the Unicorn Kings were still engaged in battle when Han Sen felt the vortex pulling him toward Lando and the Tianxia unicorn. And Han Sen wasn't the only one affected. The Unicorn Kings, the fleeing unicorn herd, and even the clouds around them were all being sucked into the vortex. Once they fell inside, they vanished. Han Sen cast his own powers, but he couldn't fight off that force of suction that was dragging him in. Not even a half-deified king unicorn could escape it, so the chances of Han Sen escaping it were nil. Seeing that he was about to be sucked into the dark swirl, Han Sen prepared to return to the sanctuary. Just before he activated his power, though, he felt someone grab his arm and pull him back from the abyss. Han Sen raised his head and saw that it was Lando who had grabbed him. Pang! Han Sen heard the sound of something breaking. Under the tremendous power of the vortex, the invisible walls composed of substance chains started to crumble. The walls shattered like glass and began to fall into the abyss. Go! Lando shouted. The arm that was holding Han Sen swung as Lando hurled Han Sen away from the vortex. In the next second, Han Sen found himself thousands of miles away, and he was still flying. As he flew back, Han Sen heard a distant shout. The gray light inside the Tianxia unicorn looked like a laser that could destroy the whole universe. It was being fired at Lando again. A dragon roar shook space itself, and Lando's whole body became a giant purple dragon that struck the gray light. Han Sen watched as the gray light pierced straight through the giant dragon body. The huge form suddenly dissolved into purple smoke. Lando's body was sent flying, still trailing streamers of that smoke. His body was twitching spasmodically. He was dying. Han Sen was shocked. He thought Lando had thrown him away, because the man believed he could defeat the Tianxia unicorn. But now, it seemed as if that wasn't the case. Why is he doing this? He doesn't seem like the sort of guy who would care about the lives of others. Why would he save me moments before losing? Han Sen kept thinking about it, but he was unable to understand. Why should I care? He has nothing to do with me anyway. Han Sen summoned his power and added to the force of Lando's throw, boosting himself away from there. Lando's body was floating amidst the clouds. The light of the demon hell dragon tattoo grew faint. It required a life force to remain active. Lando's life force was fading. He couldn't support the demon hell dragon tattoo any longer, and the tattoo fell from his body. In the end, I still couldn't attain that last step. Lando could see the Tianxia unicorn coming for him. He could see the unicorn's eyes glowing gray. A powerful gray beam came from its eyes. Lando looked so calm, though, and it was as if he didn't care whether he lived or died. It was as if he wouldn't feel any pain. And he wouldn't. He quietly closed his eyes, peacefully waiting for that final moment to come. To him, death would be a sweet relief. Pang! The gray beam broke the sky, but it didn't break Lando's body. Something tightened around Lando's arms. Someone had suddenly pulled him away. The gray beam went right by his body and into the sky, missing him entirely. The power roared past him, an incredible display of strength. Lando opened his eyes and instantly froze. The person who had grabbed him was Han Sen, the same person that he had just hurled out of the area. Why did you come back? I came back to ask you why you would save me, Han Sen said casually. Han Sen wasn't afraid of evil, but he was afraid of kindness. If someone took advantage of him, he'd always pay them back threefold. But if he owed someone a favor, he never knew quite how to return it. While Han Sen was fleeing the area, he suddenly realized something. The invisible shield that confined them had been broken, but the scary deified who had placed the shield was still around somewhere. If Han Sen couldn't sort out that little problem, escaping might be impossible, whether the invisible wall was there or not. The hostile deified probably wouldn't let them go. Save you? I'm not nice enough to do that. I just didn't want my prize to get stolen, Lando said, rolling his eyes. Lando's body was riddled with injuries, but despite that, he didn't feel pain. He didn't feel anything. He just looked pale. I see. Han Sen nodded. He hadn't really thought that Lando was saving him just to be magnanimous. This answer made sense. While they were talking, the Tianxia unicorn had turned to head toward them again. It knew Lando was dying as well. It flew over to them, but it didn't finish Lando off. The creature wanted to revel in its victory. How about we make a deal? Han Sen suggested, looking at Lando. I'm dying. What sort of deal could we possibly strike? Lando asked wryly. If we kill this unicorn together, how about we both live? Han Sen said, pointing at the Tianxia unicorn. We can live. At least for a while. Lando replied emotionlessly. Then you and I can kill it together. If we succeed, will you let me go? Han Sen asked, looking at Lando. Hearing Han Sen's question, Dragon 1 raised an eyebrow in scorn. Is this guy insane? How can he say something so ridiculous at a time like this? Everyone who heard Han Sen's words shared Dragon 1's opinion. Lando was heavily injured and on the precipice of death. Although Han Sen wasn't injured, he was just a second-tier king. He was far from being deified. Two people like them working together to slay a deified was like two ants teaming up to take down an elephant. Has the shock of battle ruined Han Sen's mind? He actually thinks they can kill the Tianxia unicorn? That is so pathetic. It proves that any person can become delusional if they're desperate enough. This is no different than seeing the mirage of an oasis, while crawling through a desert with no water, about to die of thirst. Many elites sighed. Seeing the desperation of the two young elites was saddening. Some of the viewers even sympathized with them. Unless they became deified, they wouldn't control their own fates. All the elite kings and half-deifieds felt a pang of empathy in their hearts, as they looked at Han Sen and Lando. What was happening to Han Sen and Lando today could end up happening to them tomorrow. There was no guarantee that they wouldn't encounter a cruel deified being by chance. Sure, Lando answered simply. He just nodded and looked at Han Sr. This is so pathetic. Lando was invincible against others of the same level. He is the man who slew his master. And now he has fallen this far, to put stock in such a ridiculous hope. Dragon 1, seeing all this, looked full of hatred and disdain. Close frowned too. He didn't know much about Lando. Although Lando joined the destroyed, he was a very solitary individual by nature. Plus, he wasn't really one of the destroyed. They didn't have much inclination to associate with the disgraced dragon. But even if he didn't understand Lando well, he knew that anyone who could slay a deified must possess a considerable amount of mental fortitude. Lando's mental health shouldn't have deteriorated like so, even under that sort of pressure. But Lando seemed to accept Han Sen's ludicrous suggestion. Clearly, the strain had gotten to the man. That was why he put hope in something so silly. Death is a very interesting thing. No matter how strong a person might be, they will always appear small at the hands of death. Close sighed. He was the same too. Even though he was a deified, he would still fight to live for the sake of living. Then we have a deal, Han Sen said, his face completely serious. What do you want to do? Lando asked Han Sen with a curious look. Lando didn't actually believe Han Sen could do what he had suggested. Lando was just curious about what Han Sen was planning. In fact, Lando had always been curious about Han. Senator Han Sen was like his complete opposite. Lando's life had never given him many good memories to look back on. He stayed alive more out of habit than anything. Han Sen was different. Han Sen was a man who possessed a fierce desire to live. Han Sen would employ any method necessary, including betraying his promise by trying to escape Lando, in order to survive. But the moment that Han Sen came back to save him, Lando began to wonder just who Han Sen really was. Somewhere in his heart, Lando had the suspicion that he had misjudged Han Sen in some fundamental way. Han Sen didn't answer Lando. He wasn't looking at the Tianxia unicorn, though, which was hovering over them like some victorious warrior. Han Sen helped Lando get back to his feet. He reached out his hand and placed it down on Lando's forehead. He looked like a priest that was about to bless his congregation. Han Sun calmly looked at Lando. In a very calm voice he slowly said, "I, Han Sr., by the name of all the gods, grant you, Lando, holy power forever. Open the door of destiny." Hearing what Han Sun had just said, Dragon 1 and Close almost spat out the tea in their mouths. The dukes and the nobles that watched the stream stared at their screens. They looked at Han Sun as if they were watching someone retarded. At that moment, Han Sun's actions were no longer ridiculous. Now they were simply idiotic. The approach of death must have made him lose his mind. Even if they sympathized with Han Sun earlier, this was too much. This is crazy. By the name of all the gods? Han Sun must have gone insane. This is so funny. I think I overestimated him. He was someone impressive before. But I cannot believe his will is this weak. He has clearly gone crazy. Haha. By the name of all the gods. This is so funny. This is the funniest joke I have ever heard. Dragon 1 laughed so much that tears were welling up in his eyes. After hearing what Han Sun said, even the Tianxia unicorn looked amused. Mirth crossed over its horse-like face, and it whinnied in a way that sounded a lot like a human chuckle. So many elites populated the Geno universe. Even if they were deified elites, they wouldn't call upon the gods for aid. Using the names of the gods for help was something no one would do, not even sacred leader in his time of power. But Han Sun, as a second-tier king, had dared to call on the gods. It made everyone think this was all a comedy. If he's the master of all celestial beings, then I'm the daddy of all gods, said a king-class elite with a tremendous belly laugh. Many other elites were saying similar things. They enjoyed mocking others. And with what was happening on the video stream, it was too easy. It was like two crazy people putting on a comedy skit. But in the next second their smiles froze. A red light appeared in Han Sen's hand, and that light looked like the seed of fire itself. The red glow immediately lit up Lando's body, and his entire form burst to life with wild red flames. At the same time this happened, a scary presence appeared. It exploded out of Lando's body like an erupting volcano. In seconds Lando's injured body recovered. The demon hell dragon tattoo on his back, which had just now looked dim and lifeless, was now bursting with a purple light. A purple dragon's shadow came to life on Lando's back, and it looked even shinier than when Lando had used his powers earlier. All of the stream's viewers stared at their screens motionless. No one was quite sure what had happened, but Dragon 1's eyes opened wide. He could barely believe what he was seeing. There were 2 scars on Lando's back. They were the wounds he incurred when his wings were ripped off. The legends said he was cursed when his teacher tore them off, and that they would never grow back. But at that moment, bones sprouted from his back and flesh crawled over them, creating new purple dragon wings. As the wings grew from Lando's back, the Demon Hell Dragon tattoo grew wings as well. Previously, the Demon Hell Dragon tattoo had only been half finished. Now, however, Dragon 1 sensed that there were no longer any flaws to the tattoo's composition. The presence that radiated from Lando was enough to make people tremble. Seeing a deified treasure of this power was very, very rare. This is impossible. The Demon Hell Dragon tattoo is finished. Dragon 1 was shocked. He stared at Lando with wide eyes. But he wasn't really looking at Lando. He wasn't looking at the Demon Hell Dragon tattoo either. He was looking at Han Sun, who had his hand on Lando's forehead, like some kind of ancient progenitor of gods. In truth, everyone tuned into the broadcast was looking at Han Sun in utter shock. Even if they didn't know enough to recognize the changes to the Demon Hell Dragon tattoo, they could feel that Lando was changing into something grander. The Geno universe was frozen, as all the creatures watched the stream in shock. At this moment, those 2 figures were at the center of the entire universe. One of them was releasing a scary presence, and the other one was like the father of all gods. He stood over Lando like some holy deity, giving his believer a blessing. Han Sun felt so happy about this. He wasn't some sort of god, and he didn't have a holy power to imbue Lando with. He was just using the Blood Pulse Sutra's area. Han Sun hadn't been sure what to do with it before. He didn't know why the Blood Pulse Sutra's area couldn't trigger the movement of any other universal cogwheels. When he touched one of the unicorns, however, he realized what the Blood Pulse Sutra's area was for. Blood Pulse Sutra's self-cogwheel couldn't move any other universal cogwheel, no matter how small or light it might be. However, it could push self-cogwheels. Yes, the self-cogwheels of people. The Blood Pulse Sutra's cogwheel connected with the self-cogwheels of others. Han Sen used his Blood Pulse Sutra's self-cogwheel to connect with Lando's self-cogwheel. He pushed his self-cogwheel and used its power to affect Lando's self-cogwheel. He wasn't simply pushing a self-cogwheel to release more power, though. His action activated Lando's blood on a deeper level. The Blood Pulse Sutra's cogwheel wouldn't make creatures strong, but it could modify the flaws of a creature's genes, and it could even activate hidden genes. How deep the effect could go depended on the hidden genes of the creature in question. Iron ore could be forged into steel, but it couldn't be transformed into gold. In the same way, the Blood Pulse Sutra's power could correct a creature's flaws and help it develop according to its nature. Iron, silver, or gold, it all depended on the creature. Han Sen's Blood Pulse Sutra only provided refinement and aid. From an outside perspective, though, it looked like the Blood Pulse Sutra was speeding up a creature's evolution. It was like if a land-dwelling creature was forced to live in the ocean. If their genes had a potential that would be useful for water, then after 1 billion years of evolution, they might grow lungs like a fish. The Blood Pulse Sutra, however, could speed up that entire process. A change that would normally require thousands of years and countless generations might now happen in seconds. Of course, everything was dependent on a person's genes and hidden powers. The Blood Pulse Sutra couldn't turn stone into a clump of gold. But the Blood Pulse Sutra, when used on Lando, provided fairly amazing results. It worked 100 times better than Han Sen had expected. Han Sen thought it might help push Lando's self-cogwheel to the max, returning the man's body to optimal condition. Lando's self-cogwheel was very heavy. It took all of Han Sen's strength to push Lando's self-cogwheel to spin a little faster. But who would have guessed that the speed of Lando's self-cogwheel would begin to increase on its own? Even the Demon Hell Dragon tattoo changed as well. This surprised Han Sen, because the Blood Pulse Sutra's first-tier power was limited. Han Sen had just started using the area, so pushing a king's self-cogwheel was presumably the best he could do. The Demon Hell Dragon tattoo was deified. According to Han Sen's general understanding of how the Blood Pulse Sutra worked, he shouldn't have been able to push it. But when Lando's self-cogwheel accelerated, the Demon Hell Dragon tattoo magically changed too. The flaws that had previously plagued the Demon Hell Dragon tattoo had now vanished, and the tattoo had become perfect. The scariest thing was that Lando's genes had also been perfected. He was now on the verge of becoming deified, and the Demon Hell Dragon tattoo was beginning to influence Lando's body. Han Sen went rigid with shock as the Demon Hell Dragon tattoo's power surged through Lando. The dragon pushed through the final wall that stopped him, and he suddenly generated a substance chain. He had become deified. Countless people and creatures across the Geno universe looked at Han Sen, who was touching Lando's forehead like some ancient deity. A moment later, Lando's presence combined with the Demon Hell Dragon tattoo. It rushed out into the sky as a scary substance chain came down on Lando. In front of Han Sen, dark sinews of power waved and thrashed. The substance chains were breaking space, and Lando looked like some heavenly being of power. Everyone's brain felt empty. They couldn't believe this. They were all thinking numbly, how did Lando become deified? Is Han Sen really a father of gods? This can't be real. As Wang Yuhang stared at the screen, it looked like his eyes were about to pop out of their sockets. Many other people were having similar reactions. Countless elites of all sorts of different races had their eyes glued to the screen in disbelief. There were not many deifieds in the Geno universe, and normal people would never have a chance to see this process. Most people had never even seen a deified being, other than occasional pictures on the internet. Even with the internet, it was very rare to watch a person become deified. If there was footage of such events, it was guaranteed to be carefully hidden and protected by the rulers of that race. Without the correct authorization, you wouldn't be allowed to watch a video of someone leveling up to become deified. Right now, though, they were watching someone become deified in a way that had never even dreamed of being possible. Han's son had brought a heavily injured half-deified to his feet and forced him to become deified. If they hadn't watched it with their own eyes, no one would have believed it to be true. Even as they watched, many viewers had difficulty accepting what their eyes were telling them. They thought this had to be some sort of mistake, or maybe they were seeing things incorrectly. Even all the deifieds across the universe stared at their screens with rapt attention. Their mouths hung open in shock. They had worked hard for years and years to become deified. They had overcome arduous odds, dancing on the brink of death multiple times in their bid to evolve. But Han's son had just nonchalantly touched Lando's forehead, and suddenly, the injured dragon had become deified. Han's son was just a king too. How were they supposed to believe this was possible? Fake. It must be fake. Dragon 1 gritted his teeth. He couldn't believe Lando had become deified just like that. Close was struggling with the idea as well. No one with a brain could just accept the impossible thing they were seeing. Han's son was only a king, and a low-tier king at that. How could he elevate someone else to deified? Even if a deified elite had managed to bring someone else to deified, no one would believe it. And Han's son was just a king. Pang. The Wuxia unicorn didn't believe that Lando had ascended, either. It attacked. Its scary substance chains combined to become a gray light, and the light shot forward, punching through the universe like a razor-sharp arrow to reach Lando. The demon hell dragon tattoo writhed around Lando. He took a step to get in front of Han's son, and punched toward the gray beam of light. Substance chains leaped from his fist, combining into a scary purple demon dragon. It roared and went for the gray light. This time, the gray light was unable to break the purple demon dragon. The gray and purple colors collided with a deafening boom. A black hole formed in space, and that black hole had gray and purple powers swirling inside it. It looked like a spinning Tai Chi symbol. Roar! A dragon's roar shocked the sky. The purple color within the black hole completely overwhelmed the gray, and then an enraged dragon emerged from the black hole. It flapped its wings and soared over to the Wuxia unicorn. The Wuxia unicorn was stunned. Its substance chains frantically withdrew and circled around the unicorn. The beast tried to protect itself, but when the purple dragon struck the protective shield, the shield snapped in two. The blow tossed the Wuxia unicorn a few thousand miles away before it came to a stop. Lando really did become deified. People watched the stream, their minds blank. Their brains failed to function. There was no longer any doubt about the fact that Lando had become a deified. Only a deified elite could fight a deified xenogeniac one-on-one like that. Now that they knew that Lando was deified, all the creatures in the Geno universe looked at Han's son with fire in their eyes. He had brought a half-deified person up to deified. No matter what level they were, Han's son was a god in their eyes. No. It was more like he was the father of the gods. He can produce gods. Many half-deifieds stared at Han's son's image, their eyes flaming with the lust for power. King-class elites required a 9th-tier area to become half-deified. But after suffering for all that time, they had the hope that they would somehow live long enough to achieve their real goal. Even powerful half-deifieds could only hope for the best. Taking the final step to become deified was very difficult. It could easily take a few centuries to accomplish. Few races knew how many half-deified they had, for many died when they failed to become deified. Talent, resources, fate, luck, effort, successful evolution required all 5. Many half-deified warriors had become hopeless over the years, but today, their hope had been rekindled. They would no longer have to risk their lives. They wouldn't have to fight and plunder rare treasures from across the universe. They only needed the hand of one man to become deified. Just thinking about it filled them with nervous energy. They all wanted a piece of the Han's son pie. They wanted him to bless them and make them deified. The kings and dukes, in the meanwhile, were thinking that if Han's son could elevate a half-deified, then surely leveling up someone of a lesser rank would be easy. Thinking of this, all the creatures in the universe looked at Han's son with burning eyes. They were like a bunch of men who hadn't had sex in 30 years, but they were now seeing a naked little woman. Boom! A scary power shook the image on their screens, snapping them out of their dreams. Lando was fighting the Tianxia unicorn again. This time, Lando wasn't suppressed by the Tianxia unicorn. Instead, he was the one pushing the Tianxia unicorn around. Purple dragon substance chains flashed across the sky, overpowering the Tianxia unicorn's substance chains. The Tianxia unicorn was quite strong when compared to other deified beings. It wasn't smart, but its raw power put it above the majority of deified xenogeneics. Lando had just become deified, and yet he was now dominating the Tianxia unicorn. All the creatures looked at Han Sen with even hungrier eyes. They wanted to swallow him up. In truth, the reason Lando had become so strong when he became deified had nothing to do with Han Senator. It was because he had the Demon Hell Dragon tattoo. That was what was giving Lando so much strength. With the Demon Hell Dragon tattoo on his back, Lando had a might that equaled 2 deified creatures. The Demon Hell Dragon tattoo wasn't an ordinary deified treasure, and it made Lando extraordinarily strong. But only high-ranking dragons knew the significance of the tattoo. Everyone else believed that Lando's strength was due to Han Sen's help. So they all wanted to get to know Han Sen and earn his blessing. A scream broke the sky. The Tianxia unicorn's horn had been chipped. Godlike blood spilled out in a heavy stream, and the creature looked badly injured. Lando went after the Tianxia unicorn with demonic fervor. His form looked like a purple demon dragon as he fought the Tianxia unicorn. His substance chains ripped and tore space every time they moved. Deified blood rained down over the clouds, dyeing everything a deep crimson. When the battle finally quieted down, the chaos of the video stream started to resolve into discernible images once again. Many creatures leaned forward, watching as Lando rode the bloody Tianxia unicorn out of the clouds. The Tianxia unicorn looked as sad as if its daddy had just died. That fight was destined to become a legend in the Geno universe. Before the day was out, the battle was being discussed across the universe. It was amazing that Lando had defeated and tamed the Tianxia unicorn, but Han Sen's actions had stolen the show. Han Sen had somehow turned Lando into a deified mid-fight. Before that day, Han Sen was just a king of little fame. In the vast universe filled with strange and incredible powers, he wasn't very special. If he hadn't killed Bai Yi and ended up being chased by the Extreme King, many people wouldn't have known who he was. Even if he was a fugitive, he was still just a king. Few people would have said that there was anything special about him. But after this fight, he became known as the leader of all gods. On any other day, the fact that such a name was used to refer to a mere king would have been very strange. Some wise guys even gave Han Sen the title Daddy of Gods. But that title was only used in secret. If any deified heard it, they probably would have found it annoying. No one wanted to jeopardize their own life by irritating a deified. Regardless of that, the battle made Han Sen very famous. Everyone in the Geno universe knew about him now, and so no one treated him as a measly king anymore. He wasn't deified, but most people thought he was more mysterious than a deified. There was nothing he could do about it though. After all, he had been able to produce a deified. He didn't earn the name Daddy of Gods for nothing. Recent events had clearly established that he was different from most people. Many deifieds and the leaders of the higher races knew that Han Sen couldn't just flip a switch to make someone deified though. They suspected that there were more factors involved in Lando becoming deified. But they still had a keen interest in Han Senator, even if Han Sen couldn't produce a deified. He had undoubtedly influenced Lando's evolution. They wanted to know what kind of power Han Sen had wielded. Even if that power couldn't create a deified, it seemed that he could somehow kickstart the evolution process. And any power that could aid the development of half-deifieds would be highly sought after by the races of the Geno universe. Brother Dragon 1, it looks like I won the bet, Close said, looking at Dragon 1. We dragons stay true to our word. Every dragon will now depart the Tianxia system. Dragon 1 grunted. He commanded the big turtle to depart. Close wasn't interested in watching Dragon 1, and the rest leave. He flew away to chase after Lando and Han Senator, but now, Han Sen was worth far more than the bounty offered by the Extreme King. Although it didn't seem possible, If Han Sen truly could make deified elites, then he had just become priceless. Han Sen and Lando rode the Tianxia unicorn through the blue clouds. The wounds on the Tianxia unicorn were almost healed, but the broken horn wouldn't grow back for some time. The Tianxia unicorn was very sad, and he wasn't happy to have Han Sen sitting on him. But he didn't want to disobey Lando's commands either. So, he was a very grumpy animal at that moment. Han Sen jumped off of the unicorn's back and looked up at Lando. Per the terms of our agreement, can I go now? You can't go, Lando said while looking calm. You're going to break your promise? Han Sen frowned. He had suspected that this might happen though, so he wasn't terribly surprised. But if Lando really had decided to hold him against his will, it would make Han Sen's life very difficult. Close chuckled darkly and flew over to them. He came before Han Sen and said, "A promise is nothing to him. Don't you know he killed his own teacher?" The man's 3 heads marked him as one of the destroyed. Han Sen could immediately tell that Close was a deified elite, but he ignored him. He continued looking at Lando, waiting for his answer. Although Han Sen had prepared himself for the possibility of Lando breaking his promise, he didn't think Lando was the type of person who would do that. Their personalities might be very different, but Han Sen couldn't help but feel that he shared something in common with Lando. Lando, good job. Not only did you catch Han Sen, but you also became deified. And you tamed the Tianxia unicorn in the process. When we return home, I will definitely put it to good use. Close cast a substance chain toward Han Sen to tie him up. But the substance chain didn't land on Han Senator. A purple, dragon-like substance chain flew forward to protect Han Senator. It swallowed Close's power. Close's eyes widened, then suddenly narrowed. He looked at Lando and asked, "Lando, what are you doing?" "I promised him that I would let him leave this place," Lando said quietly. "Fine. You go on your way, and I will take him back myself," Close said with a frown. "I promised to let him leave here." Lando's face remained unmoved. His expression was as emotionless as a block of stone. "Not bad. Not bad. Our promise was for me to leave here, not die here or be taken by someone else." Han Sen laughed and clapped his hands. "Lando, are you going to betray our ruler?" Black and white substance chains had begun to rise around Close's body. "I'm just keeping a promise I made," Lando said. "You must think this through clearly. If you let Han Sen leave this place, then you are a traitor to the destroyed. You know how we deal with traitors." Close smiled threateningly. He went on to say, "Plus, the dragon hate your guts now. And if you betray us, the destroyed, do you think any other race in this universe will accept you? Men that go with the flow are smart. You aren't a naive teenager. Destroying your future for the sake of a single promise isn't a good idea. I'm not going to stop you though. If you want to leave, you may. And you can take what you've earned with you. But the prisoner is mine. I will take him back. It's none of your business, and you will have kept your promise." Close reached out his hand to grab Han Sr. "I told you that he is leaving here. Whoever tries to stop him will be trying to stop me," Lando said, his eyes locked on Close. Close's expression turned grim as he stared back at Lando. He coldly said, "Lando, do you think that being deified will let you do whatever you want? You should know that a single deified means nothing to the destroyed. We can still have you killed with ease. The destroyed might be able to kill me, but you can't. You can leave now, okay?" Lando said, his voice as hard as granite. Close's face was frozen. Lando's words had made him angry. He knew that he wasn't weak, but Lando had the demon hell dragon tattoo and the Tianxia unicorn on his side. If he fought Lando now, it would be 1 versus 3. He couldn't win against those odds. "I hope you don't regret this decision you have made," Close snarled. Then he turned around and disappeared in the blink of an eye. "Now that he has left, have you really become a traitor to the destroyed?" Han Sen asked with a blink. "This wouldn't be the first time I've become a traitor." Lando's face seemed to be devoid of emotion. He turned the Tianxia unicorn to continue heading out of the system. "You don't look like someone who would become a traitor. Can you tell me more about your past?" Han Sen asked with a look of great curiosity. He was still sitting behind Lando on the Tianxia unicorn as they made their way out of the system. He thought there had to be more to the story of Lando slaying his teacher. With Lando's power, assassinating a deified would have been incredibly difficult. Plus, there shouldn't have been a reason for him to kill his own mentor. By doing so, he only would have gained the animosity of his own race and the distrust of others. There was no benefit. You are wrong. I really am a traitor that killed his teacher, Lando said emotionlessly. Can you tell me why? Hansen asked. Lando hesitated. Hansen noticed and quickly said, I don't believe that you would kill your teacher for no reason. But if you don't want to tell me about it, that's fine. I won't push. Hansen's strategy of backing off the subject worked. Although it took Lando some time to respond, he eventually said, It's not like I'm trying to keep the story a secret. It's just that if I told people, they wouldn't believe me anyway. I would believe you, Hansen said with certainty. If I told you I was my teacher, would you believe it? Lando asked, turning around to stare into Hansen's eyes. I'm not sure what to make of that statement. What do you mean? Hansen asked. Lando faced forward again. They continued to fly forward for a long, quiet moment. Hansen's curiosity was amped up even more. He was afraid that Lando might refuse to discuss the subject any further. But fortunately, Lando again broke the silence. You saw the demon hell dragon tattoo on my back, did you not? You know what that is? I don't know. Hansen shook his head. Isn't that some kind of treasure? Lando explained the basics of what the demon hell dragon tattoo was and how it worked. Then he said, People think my master worked hard for 10,000 years to obtain that demon hell dragon tattoo. But that isn't what happened at all. He found an easier way. Upon hearing this, Hansen felt a shiver pass through him. He had an intuition about where this story was going. Lando went on to say, he tried it before. But the pain was too much for even a deified being to endure. It wasn't long before he gave up on the idea. But he really wanted Dragon One's position. And he needed more power in order to claim it. So he came up with a plan. And that is why I'm here today. In order to be successfully created and wielded, the Demon Hell Dragon tattoo needed a body as a base. But Dragon 2 found a way to circumvent the need to endure that pain. He used his genes to create a duplicate of himself. Then he set that clone to practicing with the Demon Hell Dragon tattoo. When the process was complete, he planned to take the tattoo for himself. Because the clone had been created from his own genes, there wouldn't have been any compatibility issues. It would have been just like he had practiced with the Demon Hell Dragon tattoo himself. That means that the person who suffered for 10,000 years was you. Hansen demanded angrily. Lando nodded. Because I was merely cloned from his genes, I didn't possess deified powers. Before I could practice with the Demon Hell Dragon tattoo, I had to achieve king-class powers at the very least. So, he let me start practicing. And to prevent the chance of there being compatibility issues further down the line, I learned all the same skills that he had learned in his youth. I was just a genetic clone. I didn't have memories, and I couldn't think for myself. I was like a baby. I only had the knowledge, thought processes, and powers that I was given. Other dragons believed that I was his student, and his favorite student at that. People thought he treated me like a son and gave me everything. He taught me many secret skills, but no one knew he did that for the sole purpose of replicating himself within me. If he hadn't trained me exactly the way he had been trained, he thought there might be issues when he tried to harvest the Demon Hell Dragon tattoo. Hansen's heart sank as he listened. A deified elite had created and brainwashed a baby. Also, he could inflict unimaginable pain on the child to further his own power. Lando probably hadn't even fully understood why he was suffering. If you were a clone, you guys must have looked identical. Did no one else notice that? Hansen asked. Lando smiled, and that smile was chilling. Changing one's appearance isn't difficult. You just need to change a small number of your genes. For a deified, such a task is easy. That's what he thought at least. He made a tiny change to my genes, just enough to alter my appearance. However, he never expected that this minor difference would end up changing everything. Although I was his clone, the environment I was raised in was different than Dragon 2's childhood. As the years went by, The tiny change he made to my genes was compounded by the differences in environment. It was a shame I didn't know anything about this back then. I thought I was his student, someone that he treated like his real son. I just wanted to show gratitude for what he had done for me. I wanted to finish the demon hell dragon tattoo. No matter the pain I suffered, I forced myself to endure it. I pushed myself so hard that I lost all feeling in my body. After saying that, Lando laughed. But Han-sun could tell that the laugh was forced. It was Lando's way of showing that he wasn't afraid of what had happened anymore. Lando trailed off. Han-sun could guess what had happened next. Dragon 2 must have revealed his scheme, as Lando practiced the demon hell dragon tattoo. Lando must have fought with him, and that was why Dragon 2 had died. But Han-sun still didn't understand how Lando managed to kill Dragon 2. Even if he was Dragon 2's genetic clone, he didn't have Dragon 2's deified power. Lando seemed to notice Han-sun's unspoken question. He shook his head and said, "It isn't what you're thinking. I didn't fight him. We transferred the demon hell dragon tattoo to him. And he couldn't wait to practice and push the tattoo to the final stage. The process went smoothly, just as he expected. The demon hell dragon tattoo came entirely under his control, and he used his own blood to refine it. The blend was a success, and there didn't seem to be any problems. Then, once the demon hell dragon tattoo reached deified class, he discovered that the demon hell dragon tattoo had a very strong compatibility issue. Imagine a man who has just had a heart transplant discovered that there was a compatibility issue. He went insane. He had already used more than half of his blood to push the demon hell dragon tattoo to deified status. The demon hell dragon tattoo was to be stronger than himself. So he died. And you took back the demon hell dragon tattoo. Why were you labeled a traitor? Han-sun still didn't understand. Lando quietly said, "In the end, he couldn't handle the thought of his impending death. He tried to take my body, hoping that he could use my body to survive and regain control over the demon hell dragon tattoo." "I don't like this story," Han-sun said with a sigh. "I don't like it either," Lando said. Han-sun wanted to say something more, but something suddenly appeared in front of them. It came right toward Han-sun, before he even had a chance to react. A deified demon? When Han-sun got close enough to see the body clearly, he raised his eyebrows. When Lando saw the deified demon approaching, he tensed. "Please don't misunderstand, I mean no harm. I would just like a chat with Teacher Han," the deified demon shouted, lifting his hands. "What are you talking about?" Han-sun looked at the deified demon with confusion. "My name is Moldo," the deified demon said politely. "I'm one of the Alpha's guards. I'm out looking for Teacher Han. I would like to invite you to come to the demon as a guest." Han-sun was surprised. Moldo was a deified being, and yet he was being so polite, as if they were the same level. The man's voice certainly carried the weight of respect. There was no indication that a deified being was speaking to a mere king. "Don't worry, Mr. Han. We demons mean no harm. If you are willing to visit us, we can guarantee your safety. No one will bother you," Moldo said. His manner of politeness had yet to change. "What can I do for you and your people?" Han-sun asked Moldo, even though he knew where this was going to go. Moldo, still being as courteous as possible, said, "Our leader would like it if Teacher Han was willing to bless him. If you are willing to do this, our entire society would greatly appreciate it." "Give a blessing?" Han-sun was shocked. Then, he realized what Moldo actually meant. Han-sun narrowed his eyes in thought. "Are you not afraid that the Extreme King will come after you?" "I am not going to lie," Moldo said seriously. "We cannot fight the might of the Extreme King. But we have a way that you can travel to us without attracting the attention of the Extreme King. Even if the Extreme King come looking, they won't be able to find you. They cannot threaten your safety." "I see. But I'm afraid that each blessing costs an incredible amount of power. I cannot perform another blessing in such a short time frame. I doubt I would be able to help your leader by blessing him," Han-sun said. Using the Blood Pulse Sutra self-cogwheel cost a lot of energy, but Han-sun was making it sound worse than it was. He just didn't want to decline Moldo directly. "That's okay," Moldo told him. A blessing can't be rushed. If you don't mind, I am willing to provide you with protection. I won't allow anything to pull you into the clutches of the extreme king. Thank you, but I have other things to do right now. I can't bother you to accompany me, Han Sun said. If Han Sun went to see the demon, he would owe them. They might end up being less polite than they were acting right now. In that case, I will not force you. But if you need anything, feel free to call us anytime. The demon door will always be open for you. Moldo then waved to Han Sun and left. Han Sun hadn't expected Moldo to leave just like that. But he suspected it might have something to do with Lando's presence. If Lando hadn't been there, Moldo would have likely just kidnapped him and taken him back to the demons by force. Han Sun and Lando kept going. They encountered a few more kings and half-deifieds along the way. They were even more polite to Han Senator. Some people were like Moldo, inviting Han Sun to return to their homeworlds with them. But none dared to do anything ill to him. Lando's presence was great at deterring that sort of rudeness. Everyone knows you are Teacher Han, Lando said flatly. Your life will be much easier now. Han Sun smiled. A genius like me should be called a teacher. Lando ignored him. He wasn't interested in Han Sun's self-aggrandizement. You're so boring. At a time like this, you and I should be chatting, Han Sun said to Lando. You want me to compliment you? Lando asked emotionlessly. You should say things like, Han Sun, you're the greatest genius in 1,000 years. Han Sun said. Okay. Lando nodded and said nothing else. He wasn't interested. The Tianxia unicorn was native to the Tianxia system. It took them back to the blue clouds without difficulty. But Han Sun couldn't find the white whale anywhere. He began scouring the area. Where are Bauer and the others? Han Sun was worried. He was afraid an accident might have happened. But with the power of the white whale and the little red bird, even if a deified being came after them, they should have been able to escape. At this time, the white whale had come to a stop in a sea of green clouds. A flaming red phoenix had emerged from the white whale to do battle with a deified of the extreme king. It was Baoqin. The two were fighting like crazy, and fire roared everywhere. Harp acoustics broke the sky. Instead of chasing after Han Sun, Baoqin had come looking for Fang Qingyu. Upon finding him, he also discovered the white whale. The white whale had a high level of defense, but it was unable to repel sonic powers. Baoqin used the harp to attack, and he tried to enter the white whale to beat up Fang Qingyu and all the pirates. The little red bird had to become a red phoenix to fight Baoqin. The fight was so bad that it was destroying the cloudscape around them. Baoqin had brought other kings and deifieds from the extreme king, and they now surrounded the white whale. Luckily, the white whale had a high level of defense, and its weapon systems were good too. In the beginning, the kings and half-deifieds weren't making much headway against the white whale. They couldn't penetrate its defenses. But one of the half-deified beings could travel through solid material. He slid through the white whale's shell into its interior. He quickly realized that the white whale was actually a ship. Bauer was happily piloting the white whale, merrily fighting off the kings and half-deifieds. Ningyu was underneath the table with his hands on his head. His A*S was sticking out, and he was mumbling, "Don't kill me. Don't kill me." Fang Qingyu and the pirates were unable to help in a time like this. They hid behind Bauer and kept shouting, "Captain Bauer is so awesome. Little Captain is the strongest in the universe. Kill those motherfuckers. How dare they attack our beautiful little Captain Bauer? You are already dead. Little Captain, you can do it. You can do it." They continued to shout insults at the attackers, their faces red. And amidst all the noise, an extreme king man suddenly entered the white whale. He traveled through all the walls and went straight for the command deck. "Fang Qingyu, you are here." When Keek saw Fang Qingyu, he didn't stop. He was drawn to Bauer, who was operating the machine. "Isn't that Han Sen's daughter? You guys are all together? We've put so much manpower into looking for you." Keek realized what was going on. He looked furious, and he unleashed his king area. It covered the entire command deck. Pang, 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 pang. When the area landed, the pirates and Fang Qingyu were crushed to the floor, like iron filings being pulled onto a magnet. "Ha!" Keek looked up in confusion, noticing that Bauer was still piloting the white whale, and fighting the Extreme King Knights. She wasn't affected by his area. Keek's magnetic area wasn't the strongest king area in the Extreme King, but he was still a member of the third highest race in the universe. His magnet king body was nothing to take lightly, especially since he was half deified. Normal king-class xenogeneics were unable to walk under the influence of his magnetic area. Bauer was just a kid, and she was somehow ignoring Keek's magnetic area. That surprised him a lot. He hesitated, then raised a palm. A black magnetic light appeared in his hand. He wanted to attack Bauer, who was still driving the white whale. "Mister, please. I beg you, don't hurt her." As Keek was about to launch the magnetic light at Bauer, a woman suddenly stood up. Straining against the might of the magnetic area, she stood before Bauer and spoke with a trembling voice. "You can move inside my magnetic area? You aren't bad." Keek stared at her. He decided that he would need to get rid of her first. But the woman suddenly kneeled on the floor and bowed before him. "Please don't kill me," she pleaded from her knees. "Please let us go. We are just useless women. We can't stop whatever it is you want to do. Please let us go as easily as you would release a fart." Ningyu kept begging, all the while repeatedly banging her head on the ground. "Leave if you don't want to die," Keek told her in a hard voice. He was quite famous in the Extreme King, and he wouldn't bother killing a woman if she was behaving like this. Yes, we will leave now." Ningyu got up and started to pull Bauer away with her. Pang! The magnetic light hit Ningyu in the face. Ningyu was sent flying. The powerful magnetic force dragged Ningyu across the ship and flung her into one of the ship's walls. Her face smacked into the wall and stuck to it. She couldn't pull herself away. "You can leave by yourself." "She stays." Keek cast another magnetic light toward Bauer. Pang! Somehow, Ningyu had reappeared in front of Bauer. She crossed her arms to block the magnet this time, and the sudden weight made her arms feel so heavy. They were sucked straight down to the floor. Her face smacked into the floor, and her mouth twisted. "Mister, please let her go. She's just a kid, and I promised Han-san I would protect his child." Ningyu was lying on the floor in an awkward position. She cried freely, snot and tears running down her face. "It looks as if you really do want to die," Keek grunted, generating a magnetic light in his fist. Ningyu's pants suddenly became hot, and a puddle appeared on the floor. She had peed herself. When Keek smelled the urine, he frowned. He might get his hands dirty if he killed a woman like this. Ignoring Ningyu, he turned his attention back to Bauer again. The magnetic light in his hands was so bright that it was like a black sun. Bauer was still operating the white whale, guiding it to fight the Extreme King Knights outside. She acted as if she had yet to see Keek there. Keek's lips pressed into a thin line, and he prepared to throw the magnetic light at Bauer. Ningyu was pressed against the floor with her limbs shaking, but she still managed to crawl toward Keek. When she was near his feet, she begged, "Mister, please let us go. We won't get in the way of whatever you want to do, and I can do anything for you." "Get lost, you dirty bitch." Keek kicked Ningyu in the face, the force of the blow sending her flying. Pang! Ningyu hit the airship's wall, her face covered in blood. Her entire body was stuck to the wall, keeping her from falling. "If you don't want to die, then shut the hell up. If you don't, I'll kill you. You're disturbing my work," Keek snarled. He stared at Bauer again and tried to launch another magnetic light. "I want you to stop." Ningyu's voice was shaking, as if she was on the verge of bursting into tears. Keek glanced at her struggling form, but she couldn't free herself from the wall. The magnetic force had her pinned to the wall like a slab of meat. Ignoring Ningyu, he sent the magnetic light in his hands toward Bauer. "Stop! I told you to stop!" Ningyu screamed with fear. Her body managed to tear through the magnetic power, and she leaped in front of Bauer to take the black sun-like light. Boom! The scary magnetic light landed on Ningyu, and in the next instant, her body crashed to the floor like a crumbling mountain. Her limbs were held down by an iron grip, all crushed and broken-looking. Keek ignored her. He continued summoning his magnetic power. "Stop, I'm begging you. Don't hurt her. I promised Han-san I would take care of his daughter. I made him a promise. Ningyu wept helplessly from her place on the floor. Seeing that Keek was going to cast that magnetic light at Bauer, Ningyu struggled with the urge to get up. But she had been hit by the magnetic forces 3 times. The force was now too strong for her to overcome. Keek cast another sun-like magnetic light at Bauer. I told you to stop. Ningyu shrieked, looking at the magnetic light that was flying toward Bauer. Her shaking body erupted with green flames that wrapped her up in a shroud of fire. In those green flames, Ningyu's eyes suddenly calmed. His face and body regained their masculine shape. He looked like a man again. Fang Qingyu and the pirates on the floor stared at Ningyu with wide eyes. They thought Ningyu was a chicken-hearted and useless woman. But suddenly, she had just become a man. And the green fire around him burned and wisped in an unsettling way. I told you to stop. Are you deaf? Ningyu thundered, his eyes crystal clear. His face still had the dried tracks of tears and snot. His female garments had started to burst at the seams as he became bigger. But he still looked gentle and soft. You dare to play tricks on someone like me? You're dead. Keek's hand gathered up a black light. It became a black magnetic knife that came for Ningyu. Ningyu looked calm and composed, and his hands held a green sword. When Keek swung his black magnetic knife there, Ningyu's body was attracted to it. He flew for the magnetic knife. Catcha! The moment Ningyu was sucked into the black magnetic knife, he waved his little green sword. A green sword light shot by, sending Keek's head and half of his magnetic knife soaring through the air. Patong! Keek's headless body crumpled to the ground. Fang Qingyu and the others were frozen. Ah! On the other side, the green flames on Ningyu's body had vanished. His little green sword was on the floor, and his body returned to a feminine shape again. When she saw that headless body, Ningyu held her face and started to scream. She looked so scared, and she frantically stepped away from the corpse. Han Sun and Lando searched in a circular pattern, but they had yet to find the white whale. Han Sun was sick with worry. Right now, Han Sun wished he had practiced one of Mr. White's skills. That way, he could calculate where Bauer had gone. Even just a direction would do. Right now, anything was better than running around like a headless chicken. While the Tianxia unicorn soared through the clouds, they saw a person slowly start to appear. It was Meng Lai, a close relative of the Extreme King's ruler. Han Sun, we meet again. Meng Lai had escaped while the woman of Two World Mountain stole his extreme purple demon dragon. Han Sun thought that the man had already departed the Tianxia system. You should go, Lando said to Han Sun as he stared grimly at Meng Lai. Han Sun didn't say a word, he just ran. Lando had told him to go, because he wasn't confident in his ability to stop Meng Lai. If Han Sun stayed, he would become a burden to Lando. If Lando was alone, he could escape if he was unable to defeat Meng Lai. Meng Lai started chase Han Sun, but Lando stopped him on the Tianxia unicorn. Meng Lai's eyes narrowed. Lando, do you really want to become an enemy of the Extreme King? I told him I would take him out of this place alive, Lando said emotionlessly. This is what I must do. Huh. In that case, we'll see if you have what it takes. Meng Lai's expression was icy. His body transformed into a gold giant as he threw a slap in Lando's direction. The slap seemed to cover the sky itself. Han Sun felt the power like a giant shockwave coming after him. He flew faster. Luckily, the power of the shockwave had mostly dispersed by the time it reached Han's senator. He used the momentum of the shockwave to boost his own speed, and he vanished quickly into the clouds. How long am I going to have to live my days like this? After I find Bauer, I will have to go to Sky Palace. I hope the sky can at least keep me safe for a while. I need someone to protect me from the Extreme King until I become deified, Han Sun thought to himself. Then he felt depressed. The Bloodpulse Sutra's king area is too strange. It can only push the self-cogwheels of others, and I can't seem to use it on my own Geno arts. I want to enhance my bloodline. Han Sun didn't know what direction he should go to find Bauer, and he had to stay away from the fight between Lando and Meng Lai. Not long after, Han Sun reached the zone where many seas of clouds connected. In front of him was a sea of creamy white clouds. Each cloud looked like milk floating in the air. Han Sun flew toward it without hesitation. When he tried to fly into one of the clouds, though, it was like jumping into a bean bag. Instead of letting him through, it caught him and bounced him back. Han Sen was shocked. The clouds of the Tianxia system were thick, but they weren't nearly thick enough to stop him. Only cloud beasts were actually solid. But Han Sen was so fast and so strong that if he hit a cloud beast, it would be torn apart. But the creamy white cloud was totally fine, and it had bounced him back. Have I run into a high-class cloud beast? Han Sen was shocked. He looked at the cloud in alarm, but the cloud didn't respond. It just floated where it was, looking exactly like all the other nearby clouds. Han Sen couldn't see anything particularly special about the cloud. He hesitated at first, but he did decide to fly around the cloud to inspect it more carefully. He also reached out his hand to touch it. The cloud was very soft. When Han Sen touched it, it dented inwards. But when Han Sen had crashed into it at full speed earlier, the cloud felt very tough. It had been like a beef tendon. But no matter how much Han Sen poked it, the cloud didn't react. It was like a dead object. This cloud looks like a non-Newtonian fluid. Han Sen brushed away the clouds around it, and he found out that the strange cloud was only 20 meters wide. Aside from the fact that it lacked a life force and possessed non-Newtonian features, there was nothing special about the cloud. Why is there a cloud like this out here in the middle of nowhere? Han Sen was confused. He looked at the nearby clouds for a while. He reached his hand into the cloud and pushed his whole body into it slowly. When he was outside it, Han Sen couldn't see a single thing with his purple-eye butterfly. So he went in and had a proper look. Han Sen's body moved slowly. If he crept forward at a snail's pace, the cloud wouldn't offer much in the way of resistance. After walking 7 or 8 meters inside, Han Sen suddenly felt as if the space before him was empty. His hand just went right through. There's something here. Han Sen felt so happy. This cloud was 20 meters wide, and he had only walked 7 or 8 meters. Despite that, something was stopping him. It had to mean that there was a pocket of space inside. Han Sen carefully stepped through, and soon enough, he reached the cloud's interior space. He looked around and realized he was now in a 3-meter-wide space. Within that empty area, he found a plant. It looked like a spider plant. The green leaves reached out, and they looked quite lovely. Weird. Why is there a plant here? I thought there were only cloud beasts in the Tianxia system, and that there weren't any plants. Han Sen thought in surprise. He kept observing the plant. The spider plant was as beautiful as green jade. The leaves were 1 foot long, and they were shaped like swords. It looked like an art piece carved from the best jade one could find. Its life force was so strong, though, that no one would believe it to be an inanimate object. From what Han Sen could tell, the Tianxia system didn't have the correct conditions for plant life and normal creatures to thrive. Real plants couldn't exist here, and yet, there was a spider plant right in front of him. It certainly wasn't what Han Sen had expected to find when he entered the cloud. Did some other people come here and leave it in the Tianxia system? As Han Sen was thinking, a white cloud began to bubble up out of the spider plant. It rose like a bubble of milk, then went to join the clouds outside. It looks like these clouds actually come from this spider plant. That means the plant is actually native to the Tianxia system. Han Sen was shocked. As the spider plant released more clouds, Han Sen reached out and grabbed it. But when he touched it, it was just like the cloud that surrounded it. The plant was so delicate that it seemed like only a light grip would crush it. But if he used strength, the plant would grow rigid and resilient. What kind of plant is this? As Han Sen curiously examined the spider plant, he saw that there was a white fire in the middle of the plant. Han Sen fell back 2 steps in surprise. In the center of the spider plant, there was a white fire that was like a little lantern. Han Sen looked close. In reality, it wasn't a fire. It was a halo. At the center of the halo was a black bug that looked something like a cricket. The pitch-black insect was similar in size, and it had 2 swinging antennae. It climbed up the spider plant. When it reached the end of the spider plant, its weight pulled the lead of the plant lower. Then, the little creature opened its mouth. Its sharp teeth dug into the delicate spider plant leaf. Catcha! Catcha! It took a little while for the cricket to eat its fill. Once it was satisfied, the cricket began to climb back down the plant. As the insect moved, puffs of white smoke were emitted. The white smoke condensed into a creamy white cloud. Clouds rose from the creature's back, one by one, just like the creamy white cloud Han's son had seen before. Now Han's son knew that the clouds from the spider plant weren't actually from the plant. They came from the juices of the black cricket. The black cricket quickly dug back into the roots of the plant and was about to disappear. Han's son reached out and grabbed the cricket. The black cricket struggled in his hand, and it was a surprisingly strong little thing. It was no stronger than a king, though, and so it couldn't resist Han's senator. The black cricket knew that it couldn't run. Its body discharged a white vapor that soon turned into a fluffy white cloud that wrapped around the cricket. Han's son held onto the cloud like he was holding a big steamed bun. Fortunately, as long as he moved slowly, Han's son could still sink his hands into the creamy cloud. The cricket wouldn't escape Han's son's grasp like this. The cricket can't be any more powerful than a marquise, but the cloud juice it produces is quite amazing. Not even my power can break it. After hesitating for a moment, Han's son put the cricket inside Destiny's tower. Then he walked to the spider plant and prodded it. He tried to feel the life force inside the spider plant. The spider plant had a great deal of life force, but unlike the cricket, Han's son wasn't capable of eating it. He examined the spider plant carefully, but he didn't see anything else of note. He put the spider plant inside Destiny's tower as well. After emerging from that pocket of cloud, Han's son thought about it some more. Then he put the entire cloud inside Destiny's tower too. Once that was done, he turned and flew away from there to continue searching for Bauer and the others. But Han's son hadn't been flying for long when he saw a bunch of cloud beasts heading toward him. They were a flock of crane-like creatures. There had to be at least 1,000 of them. Most of them were marquises, but there were some dukes as well. The leader was the king, and it had a king area. Han's son was actually rather happy when they appeared. He pulled out his knife and dove into the flock. The cloud beasts were xenogeniacs after all. Killing another king-class xenogeniac would help Han's son fill up his king-class genes. Han's son had 4 different genoarts. Each time he leveled one up, it required 100 genes. When all those requirements were added up, it became a substantial number of genes that he needed. He had to collect as many as he could, whenever he was able to. The cloud beasts didn't stand a chance against Han's senator when he reached them. He cut the king's head clean off. Xenogeniac king hunted cloud crane king. Xenogeniac gene found. Han's son casually pulled out the xenogeniac gene from the cloud crane king's body. He expected the rest of the cloud cranes to disperse after the king was killed, but they all came after him without any fear of death. It was like they wanted to avenge the slaying of the cloud crane king, even if it meant sacrificing their lives. Han's son wasn't interested in spending the time to kill those low-class cloud beasts, though. He flew away at full speed. The low-level cloud cranes weren't able to keep up, so it wasn't long before they lost Han's son completely. But just as Han's son escaped, he saw another group of cloud beasts approaching. These looked like tigers, and there were a few kings in their midst. Haha, my luck is good today, Han's son thought with a grin. He grabbed his ghost teeth knife and flew to meet them. Han's son swooped down among the tigers like a beautiful butterfly. The ghost teeth knife he wielded danced like the fangs of a devil, and he killed the cloud tigers one by one. They were king-class xenogeniacs with 2nd or 3rd tier king areas. Han's son only needed one attack to kill each one. Xenogeniac king hunted cloud tiger. Xenogeniac gene found. Obtained cloud tiger beast soul. Han's son killed 5 of the king-class tigers, and he managed to earn 1 cloud tiger beast soul. Han's son felt pretty good about that. There were many cloud beasts all across the Tianxia system, but finding a king class wasn't always easy. And shortly after taking down 1 king, Han's son had found several more. He was lucky. The remaining cloud tigers ran after Han's son, but he ignored them and continued to fly. Han's son had been flying for a while when he met another group of cloud beasts, but this time, there weren't any kings among them. The leader of those beasts was just Duke class. Han's son thought a punch might be enough to scare them off, but this theory soon proved false. Han's son punched a dozen of the cloud beasts, but they just continued to come. Han's son shook them off his tail and kept on flying. But he started to realize that something was amiss. He seemed to be encountering cloud beasts no matter which direction he decided to go. And the cloud beasts were all so angry too. None of them were afraid to die. They came at him like he was their mortal enemy. And no matter how many of them he killed, none of the cloud beasts were willing to back down. This sea of clouds seems a little bit cursed. Han's son frowned in thought. He decided to head in a different direction, wanting to see if he would encounter any more cloud beasts. The result was the same, and again, he met another large group of cloud beasts. Han's son changed direction a few times, but he encountered groups of cloud beasts every time. But all of those cloud beasts had red eyes. They leaped for him ravenously whenever they saw him, even if they didn't stand a chance of harming him. This is getting really weird. Although Han's son had killed many king-class cloud beasts, he couldn't really enjoy his success. He didn't know what was going on, and that made him uncomfortable. Han's son could kill any king-class cloud beast he met. But the Tianxia system was known for its deified xenogeneics. If he encountered a deified monster among the hordes of normal xenogeneics, he would be in for another brutal fight. After pausing for a while, Han's son flew back the way he had come. The first thing he needed to do was to get away from that sea of creamy clouds. The place was creepy, and the creatures were far too hostile. He didn't feel comfortable being there. On his way back, he encountered the groups of creatures that he had fought before. All their eyes seemed red, and they obviously wanted to avenge the deaths of their kings. So, they all chased Han's senator this time. It looked a little while for Han's son to shake off their pursuit. Before long, he escaped the creamy sea of clouds and returned to the light blue sea of clouds. I finally got away from that cursed sea of clouds. Han's son felt relief. But before he could completely relax, he saw a shadow headed his way. It was the extreme king deified Meng Lai. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.